Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and today we have finally reached day 50 of the war. Ukraine was not expected to survive longer than 3 days by most foreign analysts, yet here we are, day 50. 50 more days until we reach 100 days of this war, and just 10 until we reach the end of the second month. And here we are watching the Ukrainians hold their ground in the southeastern side of the country and completely wipe out and rout the Russians in the northern and eastern parts of the country. Once again, I would like to make sure I go over the schedule, but before I do, I'm actually going to hand it over to Matthew real quick, and he's going to give a couple of words himself. And so without further ado, what do we got, Matthew?
So, good evening, everybody. This is Enforcer Matt. It's good to be with you again for another night of news. We have some big news tonight, but before we get to that, and hopefully I'm not sounding like a used car salesman at this point, but we just want to remind everybody so nobody misses out. The limited edition merch is going to go off the store at Friday at 12 p.m. EST, so Eastern Standard Time. So, if you want to pick up some merch, be sure to check it out before then. And with that being said, that's enough of the merch talk, and we're going back to the Enforcer.
All right, and so now that we got that out of the way, we're now going to start covering the schedule for tonight. We are going to be covering a little bit of an odd schedule. We're actually going to start with the international news first, considering that we've heard some very interesting and peculiar news about the Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but we've been getting some very alarming news about his condition today, and so we will be covering the news inside of Russia first. We will then move down into the area of Ukraine near Sumy, and we'll cover the Sumy and the location unknown news all in one group. We will then move on down to the unusually quiet Southeastern front today. There has been nearly no news that can be identified to have come from the Southeastern front, so we will report all of this news. This will also include Mariupol as well. Then we will move on over into the Kherson area, and cover the two bits of news we've gotten in Kherson. We will then cover some more follow-up news that we've gotten on the Moskva today, and then finally, we're going to move over to the United States, where we saw something a little bit funny happen today, but we will cover that last. So, without further ado, let's get straight into the news. First off, to cover the most important news, it sounds like Shoigu may be dying. He's apparently suffered a severe heart attack of a sort, and the circumstances leading to this heart attack seem to be incredibly peculiar, and a lot of people are crying that he may have been poisoned. Poisoned by who? I'm not entirely sure. I know a lot of people want to say that Putin probably had him poisoned, but the thing I'm thinking is that I'm not entirely sure if that's the case. And when we look at the info about Sergei, which is on Wikipedia, we can see here that he has been in the Russian military, well, actually the Soviet military since 1977, and then began to serve in the Russian Federation's army from 1991 to the present day. And if we look at his actual role of, well, let me make sure I'm correct with this. He is the Minister of Defense since 2012. He was the governor of the Moscow Oblast for a short time in 2012. Before that, he was the leader of United Russia, apparently a political party. Let's see. I believe this is actually Putin's party. Let me make sure with that, though. The chairman is Medvedev. So I'm highly assuming that this is Putin's party. Of course, he is the Minister of Defense, and Putin, of course, executes his rivals. So I am assuming, yes, that is him. They're in the same party. He was actually the leader of their party for quite some time, it appears. It looks like, let me check again, some 3 years' time. So we know that he's a real big party man of Putin's political party, and now he's been the Minister of Defense for some 10 years at this point. So the fact that he would be poisoned by the Russians seems to be highly unlikely, because there's so many other circumstances where he could have been poisoned due to poor performance, I believe. But another thing that I'm thinking is maybe, now this is all speculation and assumptions, but maybe it's not the Russians that poisoned Sergei. It may have been the Ukrainians or an outside power. Although I don't really want to delve in that too much, because that's really getting into like conspiracy theory land and nothing but assumptions. it's not really sure who poisoned him at the moment, and it sounds like even if he is able to recover, and it sounds like it's highly unlikely that he will be very severely disabled in a way, and so I think that he'll be permanently out of the role of Minister of Defense, and they're going to have to hurriedly try and find a replacement for that position, so that way the war's chain of command doesn't fall apart here really soon. Also, this post right here is actually just a link going to that bit of news where I got it, where I'm getting the information to say this. And so now we're going to move on to the rest of the news around Moscow, where we can see today a little glimmer of hope as a woman called Sasha Skolchelenko is facing 10 years in prison for replacing supermarket price labels with information on Russian war crimes being committed against the civilians in Mariupol. So she's been charged with spreading false information, and that is a serious crime in Russia, so it looks like she'll unfortunately be facing serious time. But nonetheless, it looks like she is holding a pretty good amount of pep in her step still, although she's in a cell, and it is good to see that there is a glimmer of hope of people who do know the truth inside of Russia and know what the Russian government is in fact doing. So I'm very happy to see that that is the case. Unfortunately, she does have to pay the price, but it's good to know that people are willing to pay the price in the name of truth and making sure that the world is, apprised of what's actually going on in Russia. And so now we're going to move on to the last bit of news we've gotten in Moscow. And I have to say this before we go into it. I know that Western television, well, American television, I can't really speak for all of it, but when I turn on the TV in America, I cannot stand watching it for too long. I just absolutely hate the brainless stuff that's put on TV here in America. That includes the news, the TV shows. I'm just not a big fan of any of it. It all seems very shallow and it's just lame. But now that I've seen Russian TV here, that's in this clip, I'm going to show it to y'all. American TV actually looks like it's from the Library of Alexandria compared to what the Russians are saying, because it makes no sense. They actually commentate in this clip on the sinking of the Moskva on Russian television, and so I'm going to let y'all see it and see what they say, because it absolutely makes no sense. Anyways, here's the video. Like this guy's got to be stupid or something, because they're not encroaching on Russian land. The Russians are the ones who invaded them, and now this guy looks like he's trying to spin a different story.
Есть казус белли, абсолютный повод к войне, настоящий, без дураков.
Спецоперация России на территории
специальная военная операция. Сегодня ночью она кончилась. И она кончилась с тем, когда нападают на нашу.
It ends when our motherland gets attacked. Does the guy not realize that Russia is the one that started this war, that Putin was the one who got out on stage in front of the whole entire world and said, we're beginning a special military operation? It wasn't the Ukrainians that said, we've committed a terrorist attack or we're invading Russia. It was the Russians saying, we're going into Ukraine. This guy is just literally spinning a whole different story. And then he's going to talk about saving the kids when we've seen more than enough footage of Russians killing kids and abusing kids whenever they're captured, and also knowing that they're being shipped out of Ukraine into Russia, which is just sickening.
Когда вы говорите ночью кончилось, вы имеете в виду крейсер Москва? Когда вы говорите про войну, вы имеете в виду объявление мобилизации тотальной?
Я не хотел говорить о крейсере Москве, тем более, что были разные. Но вы сказали, крейсер Москва – это абсолютный повод для войны. Стоп!
I don't think this guy understands. When you conduct a special military operation, which is really just a war in other words, if you lose military equipment, you can't get pissed off about it, because you got to go into a war expecting you will lose equipment. And so I don't know why this guy is acting like, oh, now the Ukrainians have crossed the line. It wasn't us invading the country that was crossing the line in any way. It's actually them fighting back against our invasion that is crossing the line. That's just a stupid line of thinking from this guy.
Это флагман наш. И здесь думать нечего. Здесь нужна ответка, но какая? Ее нужно придумать. Что говорить? Я абсолютно убежден, что победа, конечно, будет за нами. Она нужна, чего бы это нам не стоило. Иначе Лучше не говори, потому что будет.
And I don't think this guy understands that victory really doesn't appear to be in the grasp of the Russians anymore, even with them drawing in more forces to the southeast and probably trying to reorganize their supply lines and streamline them to become much more efficient. It still looks like, as of today, that hasn't really caused any changes. We'll get to that information later, so stick around if you'd like to see why I'm saying that. But anyways, I'm going to let the video continue.
Что касается крейсера «Москва», это действительно максимально тревожная новость. Очень прискорбно было бы узнать, что мы потеряли этот крейсер, но еще раз уточню, подобного рода информацию прямо сейчас распространяют только украинские ресурсы в Министерстве.
Okay, listen to this. She says, the sinking of the Moskva is only said by Ukrainian media. This is according to the translation, that is. And then she says, our Ministry of Defense said there is a fire, detonation of a piece of ammunition. And then she continues, but the thing is that if there's a detonation of a piece of ammunition on board a ship, it's usually just not sitting somewhere on its own. It's usually in some kind of ammo stowage or a silo, and it causes massive damage to the ship and where it exploded. And so it's kind of silly to act like it's just a small little thing. And you know it's not a small bit of damage, especially when they abandon the ship and the whole entire crew pretty much bails. And so you know that it's a serious issue, or otherwise the crew would have stayed on board. So we're going to let the video continue.
Обороны нашей страны заявили, что речь идет про возгорание, речь идет про детонацию боеприпаса, боекомплекта. Находится ли крейсер на ходу, пока...
The fact is, the truth of the matter is that we found out today that the Moskva has in fact sank to the bottom of the sea, and the farmers are currently trying to figure out a way to grab that thing out of the bottom of the Black Sea. So, you know, them saying we have to... This, of course, I believe was about 24 hours ago at this point. This is like at the cusp of today's news. But nonetheless, waiting for official info, I don't think they have to worry about that, because now that thing is sitting at the bottom of the sea, and people will be looking at that on tourist excursions through the bottom of glass-bottom boats. So...
Подлинно неизвестно, мы должны дождаться официальную информацию,
Но,
но
слава богу, целый экипаж.
сердце...
So, anyways, we're now going to move on outside of Moscow, because we've actually covered all the news that I've seen within Russia. And, of course, the thing is that with Russian news, I don't want to put it into the location unknown category, and I'm not particularly sure where this is. For example, that studio could be in St. Petersburg or anywhere in between, and I'm not really sure, but I put all the Russian news inside of Moscow just because it is, you know, Moscow, much like Paris or London, is synonymous with the country it's associated with, and so all the news ends up being put there. So we're now going to move from the Moscow news down to the Sumy and location unknown news, and I'm actually going to change this up a little bit. We're actually going to cover the Sumy news, and then we're going to take 3 to 5 questions, and then we're going to move to the location unknown, because I think that will allow for the usual 3 segments that we're going to have. So anyways, on to the Sumy news. We can see a very interesting little effigy that was made today. It's an anti-Putin scarecrow, is what they're calling it, that has been made on the road near the town of Sumy. Very interesting little thing. It freaked me out the first time I saw it. I was like, oh, it's a body. I was like, I can't show that on stream. But then I looked at it, and it's actually just some kind of scarecrow thing, like it says in the description. And so, very interesting. That's a pretty interesting piece of artwork there. Now, I've got to give credit to whoever made it. They spent what looks like a kind of decent amount of time to make sure that it was positioned. It even has a bottle of alcohol in his hand with something under the mask that makes it kind of look like a face. So very, very good effigy here. Scarecrow, whatever you'd like to call it. And so with that, we've covered all the Moscow and Sumy news. And before we move on to the location unknown news, which we have a load of today, we're going to answer 3 to 5 questions from the chat. And so what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so first up, we have a $30 donation from Will Riley, who says, Shoigu must have touched the skin of Dick Cheney. No one can withstand that icy, diabolical dermis. M109A6 Paladins were seen moving by rail to the Ukrainian border.
Well, thank you very much for the support. Are they being moved to the Ukrainian border, though, or is that an American artillery unit that is moving to the border but not across it? That's something that I would like to find out some more information on. But I do thank you for sharing that with us and letting us know a little bit more about the precise movements of units and their artillery pieces somewhere around the Ukrainian border. On top of that, I like the joke. Pretty funny one. You've got a thing against Dick Cheney. You've been here like multiple nights now saying stuff against that fella. I don't weigh in on American politics. Sadly, I can't really talk about him too much. But I'm not really sure how this man would have been poisoned. The Russians are, of course, very creative people when it comes to poisoning people. We know that because we've seen a million different ways that they've done it. So I'm not entirely sure. They have a litany list of things that they could have done to poison Sergei, or another country may have poisoned him. I'm still holding that open to debate, although another country will never step forward and admit it. It may have been something the design of the poisoning may have been foreign in nature. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that addresses the comment. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And I just want to say thank you very much, Will, for the continued support. You're around the channel quite often, and I just want to let you know that we do appreciate your continued support. So next up, we have a $20 donation from Chris Mack, who says, Enforcer and mods, your stream is listened to worldwide, Australia, England, Canada, South America, etc. You're important and all appreciated.
Well, thank you very much for the huge ego boost there. We do, of course, try and make sure that the best news gets out, and as much of it as possible. So I thank you so much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy it. And I'm very happy that a lot of people do watch it worldwide, because it's just interesting to me whenever we run the fundraisers, as you'll see a lot of foreign currencies rolling through, and I just think that's a really neat thing. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to move on to the location unknown news.
And the last one of the segment goes to Paul Heil, who puts in a $20 donation. He says, I understand the Moskva had FRAS-1 projectiles capable of carrying a 5-kiloton nuclear warhead. Wonder about the whereabouts now, if indeed they were equipped with them at the time.
That's a very interesting question. I'm sure that they went down with the ship, because there's really not an easy way, I believe, to remove those from their silos if I'm thinking about the correct kind of stowage procedures for that ship. It would be a little bit too impossible to do without some kind of dockyard equipment like cranes and such. And so I think those may have gone down with the ship, and that'll be something that the Russians, of course, have to admit later on, is that we lost some nukes on the Moskva, and then everyone's going to have to make some giant international effort, most likely, to go out there and try and retrieve the nuclear weapons out of that thing and make sure that they don't just sit there and corrode to the point that they maybe explode in the future. Or hopefully they're just completely disarmed and everyone doesn't have to worry about them, and the radioactive material doesn't do a lot of damage down there. Either way, I hope that addresses the question in a way, and I thank you very much for the support and also sharing that information with us. That was a very interesting tidbit. And so with that, we've reached the end of this question segment, and we're now going to move on to the location unknown news. Once again, I thank everyone for supporting the channel, and if you do put in a super chat, we will answer it before the end of the night. Just rest assured, we will get to it within the next segment or at the end of the stream. And so with that, we're now moving on to the location unknowns, which we've had a load of today. It's great to get a lot of news. It's just that me, preference-wise, I like to get my news sourced out and figure out where it is. But unfortunately today, it looks like just a whole bunch of stuff happened and everyone was so busy they didn't have time to document where it happened. So anyways, we're going to go through these bit by bit. Interesting news nonetheless. First off, we can see an R-18 drone, which we'll pull up right now just to see it. R-18 drone. These are Ukrainian, I do believe. And that looks like it. Let me just go to images, and maybe we can see a good picture of an R-18 drone. I'm guessing those may be R-18 drones, because, yeah, the R-18, that's the R-18 drone. So this is the drone that is destroying the vehicles in this footage. So I'm going to let you all see the video. It's self-explanatory beyond that. Also, I believe I have to mute it. Let me make sure. I don't have to. It's actually muted on its own. That's neat. Anyways, you can see that the drone is scouring the hillsides and the tree lines. Of course, the tree lines for enemy targets. I believe, now I'm just going to say this. We don't know of a lot of floodplains around the country. The only floodplain I've ever been conscientiously aware of was the Irpin floodplain. And this looks like there is floodplains in the footage. And so I've never seen this before, but I feel like this is actually from a time ago. So while it's down as day 50 news, this could have been from 2 weeks ago for all I know. So I'm just going to make that disclaimer here. But as you can see, they've gotten their first tank. It is apparently a T-72 that they've identified. And so they've dropped the bomb. Oh, wait a minute, hang on. Now that is something. That looks like an RPG-7, didn't it? Let me look at that again. Yeah, that just looks like an RPG-7. The RPG-7 projectile. Let me pull that up. RPG-7. We'll just put in rocket. I'm sure that'll pull it up really easy. Yeah, that looks like a match. I mean, like, if we look at that in the replay, this thing, so they strapped RPG-7 rockets to this drone, and then they have them rigged to drop, which is a nutty way of delivering this kind of course, now they got copyrighted music. It's a nutty way to deliver munitions in a way, but it looks like it's incredibly effective because now that tank appears to be brewing up, so they've dropped a second one on it. And so now the tank appears that it is brewing up. It looks like there's maybe some kind of small fire on it. So now we can see the next video. We can see once again it is another T-72, and they're dropping munitions on it. We can actually see a crewman walking towards the tank. Now I can't tell where he is. Oh, he's still right there. It looks like he's turned around, and he may have been wounded or running away. I couldn't really tell. And now the footage quality is incredibly poor. I can't even tell if it's hit or not. But nonetheless, it looks like it got a third tank. And so that's the end of that video. Very interesting to see. Of course, I don't feel like this happened today, per se. I feel like this actually happened a little while ago. But it's new footage as far as I'm concerned, so it's being put down today for us to see. And so now we're going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a destroyed Russian IFV, or an APC, whichever you'd like to call it. I don't really believe the Russians have IFVs, infantry fighting vehicles, of the modern sense. I think the only thing they have in that direction is the BMP-3. It kind of fills that category, but the rest of their equipment and vehicles really fall under the armored personnel carrier category. So anyways, here's the video. You can see it looks like a BMP-2 or a BMP-1 sitting inside of a tree line, and then pop, and it blows up. Incredibly good to see. We once again know that the Ukrainians are inflicting mass amounts of at least resource damage because the Russians have been losing armored personnel carriers and tanks to an unprecedented rate. We may now actually be able to measure the amount of tanks and armored personnel carriers they've lost in an actual whole number percentage, like 7% of their total tank force on paper. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a video of a Russian Pion unit in action. This is a very short video, and the date is unknown when this happened, but once again, I saw it for the first time today, and so it was included in today's news. Anyways, here's the video. These Pions have 207mm guns, and I believe their effective range is somewhere around 40 to 50 miles. So it's an incredibly far-shooting and heavy-hitting kind of artillery piece, but that's not to say that it is something exclusively special to Russia. Both the Ukrainians and the Russians field these in somewhat limited numbers. I believe they are a rarer form of SPG. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a Ka-52 in action on film. Once again, I'd like to note that we can see the usual tactic of them firing the rockets into a large area. As you can see over here, there's a Ka-52 right here where my mouse is circling. And as you can see as the video goes on, it adjusts its angle of attack upwards, and then it fires the rockets kind of towards the sky. I've explained this a lot before, but I feel like this is a very important thing to state, is that this is a very inaccurate way to fire rockets. The main goal of this is to give the rockets a lot more range, so that way the helicopters don't have to fly in incredibly close to their target and be under the threat of being shot down by anti-air defenses. The problem with it, though, the downside, is that these are probably being directed at a city at large, and so these rockets aren't going to land in any specific area near combat troops. These could land in the middle of civilian areas and start killing civilians. So it is an incredibly inaccurate way of firing, and it's probably indirectly leading to civilian casualties. Nonetheless, we can see this helicopter also conduct the same kind of rocket strike. Another thing I'd like to note, before we move on, is that we see a large deal of the Russian helicopters in service using unguided rockets as compared to when we usually see American helicopters in service, although, of course, I don't believe they were being used to the same degree, the amount of density of them being used over the same amount of time. But nonetheless, usually when you saw American helicopters in operation in Iraq and Afghanistan, usually they were using some kind of guided smart munitions instead, which is telling me that the Russians may have problems sourcing, producing, or may have a limited supply of these guided smart weapons that they could maybe use from miles away in replacement of these unguided rockets. So I'm going to let this video continue. As you can see in this very grainy footage, it appears that they actually are using a guided smart munition, much like I was talking about, but this kind of video evidence is rare. We can see that it's apparently aiming for a Ukrainian vehicle near a tree line. And if we can make it out in the footage, it appears that it was a hit, unfortunately. Nonetheless, it cuts to a video of a Ka-52 flying near the ground. Looks like he's landing at a helipad. We can once again see the Z stenciled onto it. I'm not really sure if this footage is brand new. I'm assuming it's not, because they probably wouldn't show the bases of the Ka-52s if it literally just happened today. So this may have been from a few days ago, but it was released again today, and so it goes under the Day 50 news. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we're going to see an MLRS attack by the Ukrainians striking Russian positions once more. This is starting to become an incredibly common sight for us. We've been seeing this a lot, but nonetheless, here's the footage of the Ukrainians giving the Russians all the hell they can. Now, something interesting, okay, I'm not saying, no. Something interesting to me is that these artillery explosions look a little different. But I don't know why, because for some reason, let me pull this up real quick. White phosphorus artillery rounds. And let's see if we can just find some pictures of them blowing up on the ground. I mean, that looks I can't really tell, though. Because you see, the thing is that white phosphorus burns for quite a while. And the thing is that in this footage, they explode, and then the fires from the embers, I guess you could call them, don't last long at all. It's just a mere second or so, and they usually die out in the air. So I don't think these are phosphorus, but they do look a lot like that. And so before anyone says that in the chat, I'm just wanting to make sure to address that it does kind of look like that, but I can't really tell for certain. Nonetheless, we do know that the Russians have been using phosphorus to an extremely high degree, and much like World War I, although it wasn't a war crime then, when the Germans started using chemical warfare on everyone else started using chemical warfare on them. So maybe this might be, hypothetically, this is nothing more than an assumption, the Ukrainians doing a tit-for-tat kind of thing and using white phosphorus shells on the Russians, since white phosphorus has been used almost everywhere on the front lines now by the Russians. Nonetheless, that's the end of that video. Very interesting to see, and hopefully we can have an expert in, I guess you could call it, it's not really a chemical or biological munition, but if we could have someone talk about incendiary munitions, I believe that would be a more proper term, and tell us if that does look like a white phosphorus artillery shell and a barrage in general. I would love to know a little bit more exact information on if my assumption is correct or incorrect. If it is, I can understand where they're coming from, although, well, the Ukrainians might be able to prove that the Russians died in the explosion, because then again, the rules of war state that white phosphorus can be used on enemy combatants as long as you can prove that they got killed in the explosion and not in the ensuing burn. So there's kind of a difference here with the Russians using it and the Ukrainians using it. In this footage, there are no population centers around where this barrage is occurring, so there's no civilians at risk of getting burned or killed by these white phosphorus explosions. So I don't, unless if there's Russian soldiers being burned in this artillery attack, it is actually within the rules of war and to something that is legal and acceptable. But once again, that's reliant on very particular and exact information coming from the ground around this artillery strike. And so we're trying to keep apprised of it and see if we can get any more information about this. Hopefully we can get some in the chat very soon. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see footage of Russian ATGMs in action. Quite a wide array of them as well. Really just two. We have the Sturm S self-propelled ATGMs, and then that, I'm not going to say it because YouTube will kill me for that, but we have these ATGMs, and I think, really, that's the Western designation for these things, perhaps, and these may just be Concours. Let me pull that up real quick, and let me see if that is correct. Concours ATGM. It kind of looks like it, but I can't really tell for sure, because it has a black cap on the back of it. No, it's the same. Yeah, this looks like the exact same launcher right here. So let's take a look at that one more time. No, I'm not going to be entirely sure about that. I might be wrong. That might not be a Concours. But anyways, we're now going to let the video play. This is, of course, filmed by the Russians. We can now see that he fired the ATGM. Now we can see his Sturm S using its portable anti-tank system. We can now see it fire. Now we can see an interview with a Russian. We can also see that he's formed his ribbons, his black and orange ribbon that's very common amongst the Russian units, into a Z.
Тяжеловато становится, не то что просто по мишени какой-то стрелять. У нас предназначены для более скрытной позиции, чтобы с позиции выстрелить, где-то залечь и, ну, как говорится, приехал, встал.
Now we see more footage of the Sturm being used.
И уже, соответственно, ведешь огонь.
You can actually see the reloading system in action here. And here's what's very interesting to me about the Sturm. I've kind of said this again, but once again, for everyone who wasn't here for this like a week or two ago, there's a large revolving cylinder inside of a Sturm where all of these individual missiles, along with the tubes that they are encased in, are situated. So it's kind of like a revolver if you've ever used one of those. And so when this thing fires, this massive cylinder inside of the Sturm rotates. This arm pops off the tube of the last rocket, and then the arm actually goes back down into the vehicle, grabs the next tube off of this kind of like revolver cylinder, and then lifts back out with the next rocket inside of its tube, ready to go. So it's an incredibly interesting system to see in action. As you can see there, the arm goes back into the tank. Hopefully they show it coming back out. Unfortunately, they didn't. But we can see them showing that over and over, and we see a little bit of BMP2 footage just squeezed in there somewhere. And so that's the end of the video. Once again, I don't like the Russians, but I do have to say that the Sturm system is incredibly odd, and it is kind of a little bit of a different system, kind of much like the STRV, the Stridsvagn 103s of the Swedish produced. It's kind of one of those things that's very odd and I guess you could say unorthodox, and it's incredibly interesting, although it's being used against Ukrainians, to see one in action because it kind of shows us a very odd technological system at play. So maybe the Ukrainian, well, once again, the Ukrainians don't have to rely on none of that stuff. They got a Stugna, so you know, Stugna's in a way, considering that this thing is not going to be used defensively because it has paper-thin armor, it is based off an MTLB chassis, which has no armor at all. I believe a Sturm is actually about as effective as this thing, because I think both of them would be used defensively. But nonetheless, I may be wrong. They may actually have a different role for this thing in terms of Russian military doctrine. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we've seen a Russian tank shelling a town. It's a somewhat long video, so I'm going to kind of cut through it real quick, make it probably about 3 minutes long instead of 6 minutes long. But nonetheless, we can see a drone flying over this burned, kind of like no man's land in a way, and here in the distance we can see what appears to be a T-72B3, more or less, firing into a village in the middle of this charred landscape. As you can see, it's a sizable village. Unfortunately, it is a location unknown event, so we don't know what village this is in particular, but still, what's odd to me and very interesting is that we don't see any infantry or any support for this tank once more. It is entirely on its own in the middle of this field. Once again, that's telling me that day 50 into this war, the Russians have not learned to integrate the tanks into their infantry or the infantry into their tanks, and we see them still operating on their own sometimes, the tanks and the infantry exclusively, which is a very interesting thing to note. So we can see that the tank is still sitting there. Apparently it's looking for the next target or is just reloading. Now we can see that it's fired again sometime in between the cuts in the video. So now we can see it sitting in the field again once more. I wish we could actually get a little bit of closer footage because the T-72B3 is also an interesting vehicle in terms of its loading system. It's an auto loader, so the tank does all of the loading itself, and you can actually see it eject part of the shell casing out of the back of the tank after it's done firing. Nonetheless, we're not close enough to see that, and we can see that that shell appears to have exploded somewhere in a field right in front of these rows of houses, and we cannot see any Ukrainian soldiers in there whatsoever. So I don't know if that shot went low. As you can see here in this trench, this ditch as you might call it, but there are no infantry in it. So I don't know what it was shooting at there, or if that was a misfire or poor aiming on their part. I would highly doubt it. It's not too hard to aim a tank's gun. You know, it of course has decent optics that tells you details about the range and such, so I don't think they'd be able to undershoot that bad, but, you know, I'm never going to underestimate the Russians and their incompetence. So now you can see the tank firing again. You can actually see there very briefly, if we go back, you can actually see the autoloader system in action ejecting the spent casing out of the back of the turret. As you can see here, a little flap opens, and the shell goes popping out and flying off into the ground around the tank. So now we can see once again the shell. We can't even tell where the shell went this time. We can see some small little explosion has happened over here near these destroyed apartment blocks, but that wasn't from this tank in particular. It's not aiming in that direction. We can now see them refocusing on the tank. It is fired again, and whoever the camera operator is really giving us a freaky psychedelic moment here with the zoom ins, zoom outs. And it doesn't even look like he's focusing on the side of town that tank appears to be firing at. We can see a car moving down there, getting very close to what appears to be explosions. But the thing is that we're looking at this video, and this drone is doing a complete 180 to look at where this tank is shooting. But the tank, when we look at it in this perspective, it's firing directly off to the right of the screen. So this drone should be able to turn 90 degrees to the right and see exactly where this tank is firing. So I don't know why it's turning 180 degrees around to look at the apartment blocks. That's a little bit of an interesting bit of information there. I don't know why it's doing that, because as you can see again, even the trail of smoke suggests that this is almost 90 degrees to the right, but the drone's going to do a 180 here in a second probably and show us apartment blocks that are 180 degrees behind the drone right there. That's very interesting to me, that why the explosions are over there, but I'm assuming that actually is the direction the tank is looking at now, because we can see the explosions hitting there over and over again, but for some reason it just doesn't make any kind of continuity sense as far as this drone footage is concerned. Now we can see, I don't know if that was a drone crew or what, but let's look at that again. I can't tell if those are the Russians or not. I think that may just be the drone crew, and they're just looking at themselves. So we now see the tank firing into that apartment block again. Of course, we don't know if it's inhabited still or not. It looks like the buildings are in very bad condition. We don't know if the tank has caused that, or if they were like that before the tank started firing at them. So I'm not entirely sure. Once again, it's looking at the group of people on the rooftop. Is now zooming out again. Also, we can see a very decently long trench work here in the middle of this charred field. It looks like it was dug out very recently and in an incredibly straight line, which is very odd because usually when we see Ukrainians digging trenches, they are usually broken up and they have breaks in them and they turn into sharp rights and sharp lefts, so that way they can break up the artillery blasts that may land directly inside the trench and explode. And when you have a straight line trench like this, If an artillery shell blows up right where my mouse cursor is, the shrapnel will travel down the lengths of these trenches until they run out of, momentum, of course, and then start to lose their speed and fall to the bottom of the trench. So it's incredibly dangerous to actually build a trench like this. But unfortunately, we don't know who dug this. It may have been the Russians who did this. It may have been the Ukrainians who did this, which would be a break from the norm of how they dig trenches. But nonetheless, we're going to go back to the video. We can see right there, it appears that the tank, of course, has an incredibly old filter on it because it's emitting more smoke than a steam train does. And it's now moving away from where it was firing. It is, of course, facing the turret in the direction of where it was shooting. And now it looks like it is starting to drive back towards the crew that was on top of the roof. We can actually see a T-64BV out there in the tree line where the right near this T-72B3, and we do know that the Russians also operate a decent amount of T-64BVs as well, and the Ukrainians do on top of that. So I wonder if that is a Ukrainian T-64B. Of course it's not. I'm just saying that to have a little bit of an interesting discussion here about it, but I'm very sure that that's probably a Russian T-64BV back there. So anyways, the T-72 is now rolling back towards the village it seems to have come from. We can also see someone walking back here behind this series of railings and fence. And it does seem, because I was looking at the chat here for a second, and a lot of people are saying that this may have been a water pipeline ditch, and I may have to agree, because it doesn't seem that it's in any sort of advantageous position. It is in the open field, and the little piles of the dirt that's been dug up near this trench are evenly spaced apart and are of the same size. Although there are trench digging machines, and we have seen trenches being used to a great extent by both sides at this point in this war. I would have to say, while a lot of people do believe, and it is true, that wars have moved beyond World War I and trench warfare is kind of a thing of the past, we still see trench warfare being used in many different examples throughout the course of history. For example, we saw trench warfare being used in World War II. For reference, Battle of Normandy, Battle of Berlin. We saw trench works being used in both of those specific locations. On the outskirts of Moscow, trench works were used in the Siege of Leningrad. Also in Stalingrad, although they weren't expansive trench works like we saw in the no man's lands of World War I, they of course were trench works. In the Iran-Iraq War, trench warfare became a usual system of operations, and also in the Gulf War, the Iraqis were commonly known to dig trenches then. So trench war hasn't entirely died, but it's not as useful as it once was in World War I. But still, it always throws up the question whenever you see a dug trench like that, is that a military trench or not? And so I believe that it probably isn't, based off of what everyone's saying in the comments section. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see footage of the missile that took out the Moskva, the two missiles that took out the Moskva, the Neptune. This isn't the footage of that specific missile hitting the ship, but this is footage of the Neptune in general. Of course, it has to be muted because there's copyrighted music in here. But nonetheless, here it is firing. And then we'll actually get some very interesting footage of this specific anti-ship missile in flight. Look at that. Now, that's a very interesting bit of film. So now we can see some kind of sped-up montage of it in flight. And so that's the end of the video. But once again, that's just for everyone to see how Neptune anti-ship missiles are launched, and also to show you kind of the speed, because it's not an extremely fast missile. It's so fast that a fighter jet can actually keep up with it without having to go supersonic or anything like that. So it's, of course, the usual kind of anti-ship missile. Usually they're subsonic in a way, so hope that lets y'all know a little bit more, and also let me see a little bit more today about how it looks, particularly being launched and actually in use. And I'm not really sure if all of them have the orange color. If they do, of course, that wouldn't be unexpected. It's not like the thing's supposed to be stealth or anything. But it's still very interesting that it's not some other kind of color like a gray or a green or what usually munitions are painted up as, although the Moab is a John Deere green, but that's getting down a whole rabbit hole that we're not going to get into here. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see destroyed Russian MLRSs of the Tornado type. This is actually rare. We haven't seen a lot of these on footage, but in this drone footage, we don't see just one of these destroyed, we see two of them. Here's the first one right here. So tornadoes are a little bit different than the Grad. We can actually pull them up and compare here real quick before we continue on, so that way everyone can know what a Tornado MLRS and a Grad are capable of, since they kind of look a little similar in a way. They're kind of based off the same chassis in some countries. Here, it's different. I don't know whose countries these are. Russian Expo arms, but it looks like they're on KAMAZ chassis instead of the normal Ural chassis that we see them on. So let's go over here. We can see a picture of one of these here. Tornado G. That just looks like a Grad. Hang on. Tornado G. Wait a minute. Hang on. Tornado G and Grad. Let's see if we... Is an upgrade package for the existing Grad. How in particular is it an upgrade package? Let's see. Strategically, including BM-20, Grad, Ergon, and the Smirch. Currently the sole operator. Interesting. So it's really nothing more than an upgraded version of the Grad. Apparently it's available in 3 different calibers: 122mm, 220, and 300mm, and they have a maximum firing range of around 90 kilometers, which I believe, as a rough estimate, is around 50 miles or so. So that's very interesting. I didn't actually know that, but still, nonetheless, now we know that these are really nothing more than upgraded Grads in a way, but still, 2 of them have been destroyed, and we haven't really heard any particular evidence about upgraded Grads that entered the Tornado category being destroyed in most areas around the front. We can also see this interesting little, I don't really know what to call that thing. Go-kart? It's like a truck / go-kart kind of vehicle. I don't know if the Russians were using that. It's filled with bedrolls and blankets. And we also have a tractor right here, right beside it, which we know is just lying in wait for the Russians to clear out the area, and then a farmer will come through, repair that thing, and use it to steal the tornadoes. But it looks like they had these tornadoes. We can see a supply truck there. It looks like a Euro 4320. Somewhere near an office building, it seems. We can see the second tornado right there, along with another burned out 4320. It appears that these vehicles have been destroyed to the point I don't believe either side will even look at recovering them. It looks like there's probably been a lot of irreparable damage to their axles and steering columns, and so that pretty much renders them incredibly difficult, if not impossible to use. And so I think these will be here for the rest of the war, and will have to be recovered much later. So with that, that's the end of this video. Don't want to drag it on for too long. And so we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see, once again, the Ukrainians are doing God's work here. They're getting rid of the mistas that the Russians love to show off at the Victory Day parades every single year. So they've gotten another one of them. As you can see, this one appears to have been bogged down in a Rasputitsa. We do know that a heavy rain has been coming through Ukraine for the past 2 days, and so I'm very sure that this is recent footage. I gotta say, it's hilarious to see this many of these things being lost, because if you pull up Mistas, I believe one of the first pictures to pull up of them is them in the Victory Day parades. As you can see, there's a shell there that was used by the Mista. And so that's the end of the video. And I'm gonna bet you money, Mista SPG. If I type this in, and we go to images, you'll see a Victory Day parade picture in here. Right there. There it is. Second row down, and there's the Mistas in the Victory Day parade. And these things, I feel like every time I watch the Victory Day parade, these things take up the longest amount of time out of all the armored vehicles they use in the parade, and they try and get as many of these things as possible, and just pump them straight through the parade to fill up the armored vehicle section of it. Still, nonetheless, You can see that they're getting beat everywhere. We've seen a whole load of missiles destroyed, which is incredibly shocking to me, but not anymore. And so we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see Bayraktars for the Navy too. The Air Force isn't the only one getting Bayraktar drones anymore in Ukraine. Now it appears that the Navy has also started to requisition ones for themselves. As we can see here, this Bayraktar picture of it taken today has been requisitioned by the Ukrainian Navy and will hopefully be put to great use, making sure that the rest of the Black Sea Fleet joins the Moskva at the bottom of the sea. Also, I like the little goal that they put on this thing. I'm not really sure if it's a turn or a goal. I'm not really sure the actual kind of fauna that's over in Ukraine. So unfortunately, I'm just going to call this thing a seagull. And it's very neat to see this little painting that they've done on it. I know that they don't really have a lot of time for aesthetics, but it is a neat looking drone nonetheless, especially with the seagull kind of like nose art on it. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see that that little dog that we've been seeing for a long amount of time finally has a name. We finally got a name for it. Its name is Patron, or Patron, however you'd like to pronounce it. But this little fella has defused 150 bombs. This little dog has done a lot of work, and I've got to give it a lot of praise. We've seen a lot of pictures of it before. Here we can see it chewing on a bone. Just a cute little thing. But it's done an incredibly good job finding unexploded munitions for the Ukrainians, and it's keeping a whole bunch of people safe. And so I'd like to give the little dog credit. It's doing its part too, just like everyone else is around the world. And also, especially in Ukraine. I mean, like, people around the world, sure, but the people in Ukraine are working overtime right now. So I've got to say, got to respect the dog and what it's been doing. It's doing an invaluable service for Ukraine, and the service of animals, specifically dogs, in this war can't be understated. We see the Ukrainians using dogs to a very large degree, and they're helping out the Ukrainians in areas that people couldn't do on their own, like bomb defusals and such things like that, and also finding missing people inside of rubble. So got to give it credit to the dogs again. I've given them credit about 3 times now, but I've got to say, dogs are doing a great job. Good job, Patron. Hope he keeps on doing what he's doing. And so we're now going to move on to the last 4 bits of location unknown news for the night, where we can see the Freedom of Russia Legion actually does exist in Ukraine, and they're actually using the Russian flag, where the blood smear, you know, as it's been called these days, has been erased, and now it's just a white, blue, white field. So here's a picture of that. Here you can see 2 members of the Freedom of Russia Legion, and you can see the flag I'm talking about in particular. You can see the white field, then with the blue, and then with the white, where the typical Russian flag is white, blue, and red. The story behind that is that that the cultural idea is that the red stripe now symbolizes the blood of, you know, the people they kill, you know, indiscriminately and are committing war crimes against. And so they've cleaned the red stripe off of it, you know, metaphorically, and now it's nothing more than another white stripe. We can also see that they're wearing this very interesting patch. It says Svoboda Russi. I'm sorry if I butchered that. I'm not really good at pronouncing Russian words, but nonetheless, a very interesting patch, and it is good to know that there are Russians that have actually joined the fight and are going to fight against the Russian Federation for what's right. It lets you know that there's not support for the Russians on any side as far as this war is concerned. And so we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainian Air Force is running a fundraiser. All right, now I don't really know how this fundraiser is being run or how you support it, but I highly suggest that everyone watching this stream goes over there and helps them buy a fighter jet. I'm going to let y'all see this video. It's actually done by a Ukrainian pilot. Of course, I'm not being sponsored by them. I wish I could sponsor them, but nonetheless, here's the video.
A businessman, an IT specialist, an actor or a singer, whichever nationality you are or country you live in,
Oh my
you can
God.
help us to stop the terror.
Hang on, I'm going to go to Twitter real quick because they've deleted it off of Reddit, of course. But here's the video again, and I'm going to put it up here so that way y'all can see it without it going black on us and then saying the tweet's been deleted.
A businessman, an IT specialist, an actor or a singer, whichever nationality you are or country you live in, you can help us to stop the terror. Buy me a fighter jet. I will fight with my whole heart to destroy the tanks, armored vehicles, and war criminals' occupants. They would not escape neither from me and, you know, from the anger of the Ukrainian people and God. Please, join our fight to stay free. The only planes of your enemies that would be left on our land would be trophies. Buy me a fighter jet.
Once again, an incredibly
businessman.
interesting endeavor there. It's something odd, and I'm going to make sure to look into it a lot. And if they have an EIN number and they're actually verified, because, you know, once again, while a lot of fundraisers pop up, I want to say this, a lot of fundraisers pop up during these times, and sometimes people are trying to take advantage of others. And so it's a very interesting thing that the Air Force, you know, is an observation on my end, just saying my skeptical side here. It's very interesting to me that the Ministry of Defense is accepting direct donations, and the ministry would then disseminate that money into the branches of the military. And it's very odd to me, in a way, that the Ukrainian fighter pilot is going to run a fundraiser to get a jet. But once again, if it is real, I'm going to try and look into this as much as possible and see. And if it is, and they have an EIN, maybe this will be the next fundraiser we run on the channel. But once again, I'm going to kind of stay skeptical with this one and look into it a bit more. But it was a very interesting bit of news and info nonetheless. So we're now going to move on to the last two bits of location unknown news, and then we're going to move on to 3 to 5 more questions from the chat, and then cover the rest of the news around the country. And we've seen the farmers with a fresh catch. Check this out right here. They've gotten another vehicle today that looks like a BMD-4. I can't really tell for sure though. But let me get this here. And it doesn't really... Actually, I'm going to be honest with you. While everyone credits this stuff to the farmers, this guy's driving a JCB backhoe. So I don't know if this is a farmer or a construction worker. But nonetheless, another Ukrainian has hit payday. So let's watch this video real quick.
Ёбаный сепарский танк. Угнали нахуй. С Маковеем.
So anyways, we can see them busting out laughing as they're moving this tank around. Well, APC. I think APC is a proper term for this.
На ходу полностью боевой комплект, все нахуй. Полностью боевой.
So you see them rolling it on along. This guy's got a funny laugh. Okay, I'm not gonna lie. That guy laughs like Beavis and Butthead, if y'all remember that cartoon. That guy laughs like that, but nonetheless, I would be laughing like a clown too if I had just stolen a Russian tank from the army. So, anyways, we're gonna let the video keep playing. And so that's the end of that video. Once again, I think that BTR's cannon will be loaded with blanks that have seeds in them, and they're just going to drive down the fields at the beginning of next harvest season and just start shooting the seeds into the ground like bullets. But nonetheless, an incredibly interesting video, and that guy's laugh was pretty funny. But then again, I can't blame him. I mean, like, I would be laughing like that too if I had just stolen a tank. So we're now going to move on to our last bit of location unknown news, and then we're going to move on into the questions. We can see that the Ukrainian Air Force has embraced the ghost of Kyiv. The ghost of Kyiv has died in memory, I think, in a way. I'm not really even sure if he existed, because it seemed like it was something of a PR stunt that someone came up with on the internet, and that was kind of how the story ended, and then it died in popularity. But we can now see that the Ukrainian Air Force is at least taking up the ghost of Kyiv in spirit, and that they're starting to make nose art with a MiG-29 inscribed on it, and kind of like a ghost face on it. We can also see here that they have a little illustration of a MiG-29 in flight. Looks like a Ukrainian one, of course, and it's incredibly interesting to see. We can also see 3 kill marks here on this MiG-29, this one in particular, of 3 Ukrainian aircraft, which means that in war games, this pilot who's flying this MiG-29 has shot down, simulated shot down 3 other Ukrainian aircraft. So this guy apparently is pretty decent. Unfortunately, we do not see any Russian Air Force aircraft victory marks on this plane of saying that they have been shot down, but hopefully this guy can flex his muscle soon and hopefully get his first kill on some kind of Russian aircraft, regardless of what they are. But very interesting to see them kind of take on the moniker of the Ghost of Kyiv in a way and accept it as a very cool and interesting thing. And so with that, we have reached the end of the Location Unknown news. It was a pretty decent amount today. It actually made up like half of the news stories we've got. And so with that, before we move on to the Donbass and the Belgorod area, which has been eerily quiet today, and we're going to go into that in a second, we're going to take 3 to 5 questions once again from the chat. And so what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so first up, we have a whopping $216 donation from Paolo Corradini. Thank you very much, Paolo. That is a very generous donation. And I think he already got off for the night, so unfortunately, he's probably not here. But I wish he was, because we'd like to thank him in person. So, anyways, he says Russia keeps claiming that Ukraine had nothing to do with the sinking of their flagship. Maybe the Moskva merely slipped on a banana peel and capsized. Doesn't that happen all the time? Jokes aside, thank you very much for the great coverage and greetings from Italy.
Well, I thank you so much for the support. And also, hey, from America, because that's really neat to know that we have a lot of international viewers. And, of course, not to pry too much into it. And unfortunately, if you've left, I hate to hear that, left the stream for the night, didn't leave permanently. But I wish you could tell us what part of Italy, because my brother is actually a huge fan of Italy. What's the part that you like, Matthew? Just to ask you again.
Just sort of the coastal region, really.
Oh yeah, I think he's talking about the Riviera, the Italian Riviera. He's a huge fan of Italy. He thinks it's a very beautiful place. I think it's very beautiful, but honestly, I'm a big fan of Britain and Switzerland. I think they're pretty cool. But nonetheless, to answer the question, I think hypothetically speaking, the Moskva may have slipped on a banana peel. We know that the Russians are incredibly incompetent. We know that the Kursk disaster, which historically was something that may resemble this in a way, was caused purely by Russian incompetence and poor maintenance. The story of the Kursk was that I believe it was something like a torpedo tube malfunctioned, and so when a torpedo was loaded into the tube, apparently salt water got into the corroded torpedo casing and caused it to explode, which blew apart the entire front of the submarine, leading it to plummet to the sea floor. And in the process of this whole entire fiasco, all the crew members got killed by their own incompetence in a way. So it may be the case that the Neptune cruise missiles may have not, like, I'm just saying this as a hypothetical story. I think entirely that the Neptune anti-ship missiles, there's the correct term, did in fact succeed in hitting the Moskva. But just as a hypothetical what-if scenario, I wouldn't find it entirely out of the question that the Russians may have sank that ship entirely on their own. But of course, we'll have to wait for more information to come out. But as of now, I'm going to stick with the story that the Neptune anti-ship missiles hit the ship twice, blew up an ammunition stowage, and then the crew abandoned ship and the thing keeled over and sank today. So I thank you very much for the support. Once again, that's a huge amount of support. It's very cool to see that we do have international viewers from around the world. And so I thank you once again. It does help us to run the channel. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And just for anybody asking about the map, we are having an issue with it, but we are working to get that fixed again. It's been having some glitches for the last few days, but we are going to get that fixed. But moving on to the next one, we have an $18 donation from NP, who says, "Thank you for the nightly update."
And I thank you so much for the support. It does help us to run the channel. And I am very appreciative that a lot of people do like the nightly report style. I do know that some other channels do it like sparsely, like every 3 days or so, and then even at that it's kind of a little unpredictable. But I like to do it every single day because, one, that's why I went into this doing, and I'm never going to change that. And two, it's going to be very interesting to look back on in a year, because this is going to practically serve as an archive of all the things that happened on every single day in this war in video format that people years down the road can come back to and watch day after day, a literal documentary of the war as it unfolded. So I thank you so much for the support. I do like that you enjoy it. And with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to cover the Belgorod and Donbass regions as a whole.
And before I move on to the next question, I want to quickly recognize a $26 donation from Rob Scott. Thank you very much, Rob, for your donation. As always, all the donations help us to run the channel, so we very, very much appreciate it. Our next question up is from Andrew Parker, who puts in an $18 donation, and he says, "Don't underestimate Putin. I think he's planning a special military operation in Atlantis."
That's a pretty good one. That's actually new, and I think that's actually a pretty smart one right there. I've never heard that joke before. I've heard the glass bottom boat one a lot, but I haven't heard that one. I like that. That was creative. That was pretty creative. I think I'm gonna have to use that as a quote. But yes, I think he's with the Orsk and the Moskva. I think they are starting to work in that direction. We will, of course, cover that news a little bit later on tonight about the actual state of the Black Sea Fleet right now. But I thank you so much for that joke. I like that one a lot. And with that, we've ended the this round of questions. And so we're now going to move on to the news in Belgorod and also the Donbass. This will include Mariupol tonight. And so with that, we're now moving on to Belgorod, where today we have gotten some very vague but very big news that there has been a large fire that has broken out in Belgorod. The Russians say that they have it under control. I will click on this actually, just so that way everyone can see it, because the day 50 map for some reason is having a glitch. And so unfortunately, y'all can't click on it and look at it for yourselves, and I'm sorry about that. We will try and work on that. Right now, it says that this map is saving, and so here's the thing that I found out. Everything on this map right now, today, and I hate this, is going to disappear. Because when I try and refresh this page, it's going to remove all this stuff, because it's going to say it was never added on in the first place. And so no one will ever be able to look at today's news, sadly. So I hate that, but that's really what it is. So anyways, we can see here in this video from a Twitter post that there has been a large fire in Belgorod. We don't really know how it started or why, but the Russians are saying that they have it under control. This may be evidence of another attack, probably not a helicopter assault like it was the last time. This may have been another Tochka cruise missile attack like we saw on the Kursk 1st Army Armory many weeks ago. Once again, we're not entirely sure. That's all assumptions and speculation, and we're going to try and get more information on that story in the following days and see if we can clarify what exactly is happening in Belgorod right now. So with that, we're now going to pass Kharkiv. Let me make sure I get that right. We're now going to pass Kharkiv because there's been no news coming out of there. It seems like the front has fallen relatively quiet around here, and I'm actually going to take the liberty right now to change this map. The Russians are no longer on the ring road. They've actually been pushed back a decent ways from the city itself. And so I'm going to put the front line around Kharkiv around here, so that way it's not looking like the Russians still are on that ring road. So we're now going to move on further down the front to the area around Izyum, where we've gotten incredibly large news today that the Ukrainians have managed to conduct a very successful counterattack near the Severodonetsk pocket that I've been talking about and fearing may be a thing if a Russian assault was to occur. It seems like the easiest thing they could do on this front to cause a large amount of material and personnel damage to the Ukrainian side. But nonetheless, we can see that a counterattack here today has managed to capture some 30 miles over the previous few days, and now today they have captured the town of Borova. This is the link, of course, to show that there is information to back this up. This is from a trusted source. I kind of look at their information every once in a while. Don't really reference the maps a lot. In fact, this is the first time I've ever referenced their map and actually changed mine in accordance with theirs. But it does seem like the information here could be backed up in a way because they haven't been wrong so far. So I was pretty confident with making this change on the map. So we're now going to move on down. Also, we're going to talk about this pocket again. This has kind of changed the situation a little bit. This counterattack here is now threatening the Russian position in Izyum. I'll tell you, well, I mean, like, that's a tough thing to do, you see, because I don't like to give away Ukrainian plans and positions, but honestly, I think the Russians, if they're not, like, blithering idiots, can probably see what's about to come here. I mean, like, they harp on chess a lot in that country, and so I would find it very difficult to believe that they couldn't see what the Ukrainians might be planning on doing here. So I'm going to give about 20 seconds in the chat. We're going to talk about the pocket in general, and if everyone says they want me to say what I think is the Ukrainians are going to do up here, then we'll revisit that and talk about it, but I don't want to do something that may put the Ukrainians at a detrimental disadvantage just in case the Russians haven't thought about this and they have people watching the stream. So the Severodonetsk pocket, just to cover this again for all of my new viewers, because it looks like we're getting a lot of them over the past 2 days, so welcome everyone. Make sure to join the Discord if you like. We have one. I'd love for y'all to be in the community, and make sure to subscribe if you do like the content. We come on every single day of the week except Monday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time and cover the last 24 hours of news. On Tuesday is the last 48 hours because we skip Monday so that way I can have a day off and kind of take a break and recharge and make sure I can keep doing this. But nonetheless, we've seen two pockets kind of form possibly in the Severodonetsk and Kramatorsk regions. First, there's this finger here, which I'm not really sure if it's a finger anymore. It may have gone back to being towards Severodonetsk. This may have been nothing more than a drone attack that was called a counterattack. But anyways, this here is a little bit concerning because we've seen the Russians create an advance in Crimea and Rubizhny in the area around there, and it looks like they may be putting a lot of pressure on trying to create some kind of pocket drawn in yellow here around the city of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk that may put them in the exact same position that Mariupol is in a way, where they're cut off from supplies and they can try and pick away at the Severodonetsk Lysychansk defenders day by day, a little by little, until they take the entire city. Then, if they were to be incredibly ambitious and try and cover a very large area, if we measured this out with a ruler, this pocket would be around 70 miles in width. So this would be an incredibly ambitious endeavor to undertake, but nonetheless, Russian forces could set off from the villages of Slitvodarsk and Izyum towards the town of Slavyansk and create a massive pocket that encompasses the Severodonetsk and surrounding villages, and then lead the Ukrainians into a massive encirclement that could probably encapsulate tens of thousands of troops. So, unfortunately, the situation looks like there could be two advantages here that the Russians could, of course, pursue. I think that this is kind of changing that situation up there. I'm not going to get into it too much, and it looks like the overwhelming statements in the chat are that I should not talk about what the Ukrainians are going to do, and I can agree that that's a good call. I was just wanting to make sure that everyone wasn't thinking that I was acting like too much of a security freak with the information I was giving out. I don't want to be one of those people, because there's those people who want to act like everything's classified, although some of it's public information and very obvious. So we're not going to cover what the Ukrainians will do up there, what I think they'll do. But I'm just going to let y'all know that I think the Ukrainians are lining up to do something very impressive, and I'm just going to leave it at that. So we're now going to move on further down in the Donbass into this general area where, sweet Jesus, we've seen a museum relic being brought out. And I've got to say, I can't frown at this museum relic because it's still really being used to this day by a large amount of armies. We have seen the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Force get a hold of an MG-42. You can't make this stuff up. I don't know how they got this thing, but that's crazy.
Страшна херня для кацапа. Шнеля, блядь. Классная штука. Четко, четко.
I don't know if they have ammunition for this machine gun, but nonetheless, I don't know where they got it. MG-42s here in the United States cost around $50,000 to $75,000. You also have to get a tax stamp of $200 for it and wait for the ATF to approve you to actually purchase the gun, which then takes about another year. So it's an incredibly huge process to get one of these here in the United States, and I think it would have been cheaper to buy them a fighter jet instead of getting this MG-42. I don't know where they got it, but still, I'm blown away that they have such an impressive machine gun, in their hands. I have actually shot an MG-42 before, and I have to tell you that it's true for the most part. Now, the German tanks in World War II, very questionable. I think the build quality on those was incredibly poor, actually, beyond the actual welds and stuff that they did. The transmissions were terrible. The engines were underpowered. Usually the turret traverse systems were incredibly underpowered. Everything about the German tanks was underpowered except for the firepower and maybe the weld quality and overall aesthetic qualities of the vehicle. The guns, however, is I've shot an MP40, an MG42, and I think an STG44, but I forgot if I did or didn't. These guns are beautiful. I've shot an MG42 before. The recoil is amazing. It goes straight back into your shoulder, and so if you brace your shoulder really well, this machine gun is incredibly controllable. You can get a very effective spread out of it, and you can hit generally a torso-sized target at about 150 yards with this thing, just laying into it and not letting off that trigger. And very impressive gun. And I have to say, I hope that they can use this, because although we do have more modern machine guns like M60s and such, I still believe that the MG42, considering that it's now called an MG3 and it's had slight development, slight changes to its actual operating systems, but nonetheless, it's still used heavily by the German army. And so I hope that they do manage to find some ammunition for this MG42 and use it on the front lines. I believe it'll be incredibly effective for them. And so I'm just going to leave that at that. I'm a huge fan of the MG42 and the MG3. They're very good machine guns. I've been able to shoot an MG42 in real life, and I've got to say, the hype on that one is real. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news inside of the Donbass region, where we can see around Donetsk that a Russian tank was destroyed under some withering fire from the Ukrainians. It's a very self-explanatory video, good thing to see, and so I'm just going to let y'all see the footage here. So you can see that it's some kind of BTR-4 perhaps that is lighting up this tank. It also looks like there's an APC down here on the road, and it also looks like it was firing a machine gun towards the direction of that tank. But that tank just got mauled by a BTR-4. It appears that it was facing the other way, which is very interesting. It seems like the Ukrainians have captured this tank by surprise and destroyed it in the process. So I have to say, very interesting and very neat. I like to see this. Once again, the Ukrainians are getting the best of the Russians in a way, so I gotta love it. Once again, gotta give a whole load of support to the Ukrainian fighters. They are brave and incredibly cunning, as we've seen so far, and while on paper they are outmanned and outgunned, they continue to defy the odds that the Western world and most military analysts lay out for them, and continue to give it to the Russians in ways that no one can expect. So with that, we're now going to move on out of the Donbass, and we're also going to cover that it's been incredibly quiet today. Beyond this development of this new finger on the front line, and these two bits of news here, there has been nothing that's actually been occurring in terms of video evidence on the Southeastern front at all. I don't really know if this is suggesting that there is now a lull in fighting for both sides and this war is starting to develop into a stalemate, but the occurrence of today's news being this quiet says a decent amount, considering that the Russians were supposed to be conducting a renewed attack either yesterday or today, and now it's not happened. This may suggest that they're waiting for improved weather, or this may be saying that they no longer have the ability, and now their logistics have fallen apart now that they've moved in more units, and their whole entire front line is stalled. So we'll just have to wait in the coming days to see if that is the case. So now we're going to move to Mariupol, where I have made major changes to the map. Today I was able to confirm that the Russians do hold a decent amount of the downtown area, as you could call it, and also this western side of the city. So it appears that they are trying to draw down the middle of the city right now from what we can confirm, and they may have already done this. Looks like they're trying to push through the downtown towards the Kalmius River and cut the Ukrainian defenses in two. So I'm going to put that right there in yellow. I'm going to call this a Russian offensive. And we're going to put that in yellow real quick, so that way everyone can tell. And hopefully the Ukrainians watching that may be in Mariupol. I don't know if we have any of those anymore. But so that way they can tell. I think that's what the Russians are doing if they haven't already done it. They're going to try and divide the defenders. I believe this will probably be the 36th Infantry Brigade on this side of the city. And we know that the Azov is inside of the Azovstal. And they're going to try and split them in two and then take care of them one at a time. Of course, cutting them into smaller pockets makes the defenders a more manageable foe, because there's no way for them to shift the numbers around as much as they once could. But with that, I think that's where this city is heading in this direction. But nonetheless, it's held for around 47 days, and you have to give the defenders of that city a load of credit that in the era of modern wars, where battlefields can move 50 miles over the course of a week, they've managed to hold a city relative and hardly lose any amount of land when you really think about it over the course of 47 days. That is a massive feat that can never be understated, and this is a siege for the history books. So with that, we're now going to start off with the news in the western side of the city, where we can see fighting footage in Mariupol dated April 13th, but it was included today because it was only uploaded today. Of course, this is from our one and only TikTok stars. I have to mute the video because they love to throw in their music. As we can see here, we've got one of them talking to the camera. Now we can see them engaged in one of their fake firefights, most likely, where you don't hear any enemy fire. We can now see more firefighting footage. Now they clip back to the last bit. RPG-7 firing. Also notice, that I said this earlier in the video, they are using trench works. Trench works are still used, just not as much as they once were. So, really, honestly, World War One, you know, this is taught in school, but it's true that World War One is kind of the beginning of the modern war era. It had most of the technological developments that led to this becoming a thing. So, we can see them loading an RPG-7 there. We can now see someone firing it in the distance, perhaps. They're, of course, firing more guns. The guy runs out there, shoots the RPG, then he gets up and runs. What is up with this ugly camo? Where did this guy get this? This looks like one of those frog jumpers that you give a child. And he's also wearing the Special Forces helmet without a headset, which, of course, we all know I have a huge critique about that. You're losing the purpose of a helmet with that much material cut off of it. And on top of that, you're not even using a comm system, which is what that thing's designed for. So you're pretty much wearing it just for the drip, I guess you could say. So now we can see an overall view of the city. And now a fire that is burning inside of Mariupol. I hate to see this kind of footage. But, you know, it's the thing that's been happening. Oh, yeah, look, a shush helmet. You got a shush helmet, man. It also looks like we have a guy back there wearing a beanie only. I don't know if he has a helmet or not, but if he's just wearing a beanie, he's in pretty bad shape. So now you see a guy wearing a very loose armor rig. Jeez, dude. Adjust the armor rig. This is supposed to be on your chest. This isn't supposed to be protecting your nuts. This guy needs to figure out how to wear an armor rig. Anyways, we're now going to move on to the next video, where we can see the DPR in action in Mariupol. These aren't the Chechen Supermen. These are the DPR Supermen. So here's the video of that. Of course, we got watermarks all over the thing. We can see them firing inside of a building. So we can see them still shooting out of the building. I mean, like, they're acting like this is some sort of cowboy fight in a reenactment, you know, just unloading the guns out of the windows and stuff. This guy's shifting around, you know, this guy's shifting around like it's Battlefield or something. He's like, make sure not to stand in one spot or they're going to cap you. Look. Shifting around and everything. This isn't Battlefield, man. Like, if you're in the window, they're just going to light up the whole thing, so, you know. I mean, as the footage continues, he's reloaded the AK. He's now going to run up and do some sidestepping and side shifting. You know, this is some stuff that you hear people say in Fortnite. Don't stand in one spot. Make sure to run around in circles or something. No, that's not how real life works. You can really just generally stand in one spot and shoot, and you'll be as good as kind of like moving left and right 1 foot here and there. I mean, like, they're not shooting for your head. They're shooting for your chest anyways. So, you know. So that is the end of this video. Of course, it seems like it's a fake, made-up video. Of course, we didn't hear any enemy fire coming in. We just heard fire going out of the building. And so, I have to say, I don't want to say this every time because it sounds like I start discrediting all the Russian sources, but once again, this looks like a fake video, and that's all I gotta say. Sorry, I know there's a decent amount of viewers who sit there and say, he only looks at the Ukrainian side. I only look at the Ukrainian side most of the time, because they're the only ones who release believable footage when it comes to firefights, because you can actually hear enemy fire coming in most of the time. In Russian footage, you never hear anyone shooting but the people on film. So, with that, we're now going to move on to the next video, where we can see that my baby's a superstar. We can see, of course, our wonderful TikTok superstars. Again, a little bit of the same footage, actually, around the city. So, this guy fired the RPG in the trench, and then the rest of them are shooting over the cars like gangsters. Although, the thing is that you could actually just really shoulder that rifle and shoot right over the car just fine, and probably a lot more accurately than what they're doing. But, of course, they do that stuff for the show. Also, they're just wasting ammo, honestly, at this point. And we can once again see the man in the frog jumper, but much better this time. And I have to say, this guy must be the one they hate the most in whatever unit he's in. And they're like, oh, we're going to give him the stupid camo that makes him look like a kid in a frog jumper. Because I gotta say, that is the ugliest camo pattern I've ever seen. It even beats the universal camouflage pattern that I think that's called the ACU that the US used to use that looked like it came out of some kind of computer. So with that, we're now going to move on to the last 2 bits of news we've gotten inside of Mariupol, where we can once again see, you've guessed it, more Chechens in Mariupol. We've been getting almost nothing but footage from these TikTok superstars, and I think that a lot of them are probably getting a decent amount of money off of TikTok. So we can see here, there's outside this building. You can actually hear some stuff going on outside. It looks like they're trying to make these more convincing, or they're actually filming these on the front lines now. Of course, I'd like to note, not shouldering the rifle. He's just holding it like it's some kind of quote-unquote pistol, as far as the ATF would call it, like it doesn't even have a stock. What's the point of giving these people stocks on their rifles if they never even used them? You know, just take them off. You know, if these are the AKs where you can take off the stock, that is. But just take them off. I mean, like, it would honestly save the Russians money, because they never used the stocks in the first place. Look at this recoil management here. Having to use all of his arm. No shoulder in this. Look, once again, no shoulder. No shoulder at all. That just irks me so much, because whenever people talk about the Russians, you know, well, let me just put it this way. There are the kind of people out there that want to be the military gurus, you know. They're the ones who never enter the military, but they're the ones who want to imagine to be in the military. And so they always talk about, oh, you know, like, you got to do, like, the right kind of thing, dude, like the military thing. You've got to, like, shoulder the rifle, never put your finger on the trigger unless you're ready to shoot it, and all this other stuff. You got to drink your own piss and climb up mountains. And then you actually watch footage of people who are supposedly in a military around the world, and also those same kind of military people that I'm talking about were the ones before the war talking about, oh, man, dude, the Russians would be a tough fight. It'd be like Red Dawn. And now we can see the kind of people that the Russians actually use, and they're people who've never even been told to put the stock of the rifle on their shoulder, which literally puts them below the average civilian marksman in the United States, which can get pretty low at times in terms of skill. So I'm just gonna let the video keep running. So we see this guy, of course, not using the stock. This guy's shooting it like a pistol. You can't even explain the stupidity of these people. Like, it's mind-blowing how dumb they are and how poorly trained they are. Someone should be saying, you don't shoot a gun like that. Someone should have taught them you don't shoot a gun like that. That's awful. You can't even aim that. That's terrible. Anyways, we're just gonna let the video keep running.
What the?
Once again, no stock. I'd also like to point out, I have noticed this, that he's not stuck with iron sights. He's actually got some kind of scope on it. So I guess that's kind of like the Russian version of the golden AK. Like, he's done good enough. Like, he actually luckily hit someone with that kind of poor aiming form. And they said, hey, good job, man. You get a scope now. Although it doesn't really look like he's even using it. But once again, not using the stock. So we've seen that they're doing a terrible job. This may also be why the Azov is holding so well, because while these guys are just spraying an entire apartment block because they're aiming so poorly, the Azov is probably properly putting the rifle on their shoulder and having very good recoil control and being able to actually aim the rifle. So with that, we're now going to move on to the last bit of news in Mariupol, where we can see, excuse me, geez, where we can see Russian tanks in use in Mariupol. I'm sorry about that, y'all. So anyways, here's the footage. So we see the tank firing, we see a BTR-82 backing up, it appears. We see fire once again. And so with that, that's the end of that video. And once again, that's the end of the news in Mariupol, much like every night. Unfortunately, the amount of news we get out of Mariupol just really depends on the weather, nearly. It seems like that. Some days we get a lot of news, some days we get little. This was actually a moderate amount of news today, which I'm very happy with. But I just wish we had more news coming out of Mariupol that wasn't just videos of Chechens doing stupid stuff over and over and over. I get really sick of seeing them, and I wish we could actually see, although they're probably not able to do this, video footage of the Ukrainians, because we know that the Azov at the start was doing an amazing job at holding off the Russians, and I think they still are. It's just that we're not able to see the footage of it, sadly. And so with that, I don't know how much longer the Russians will hold. well, I'm sorry, not the Russians, the Ukrainians will hold. But once again, I've got to say this over and over. You've got to give them loads of credit and respect for holding this city for that long. This is a history book kind of moment here. We're looking at history being made every single day that this city holds. So now we're going to move on to the news outside of the Donbass area. But before, well, actually, I think we've already covered our 2 question segments. So we're actually going to move on beyond the question segment and just cover the rest of the news from around the world. There's not much left inside of Kherson, the Black Sea, and the United States. So with that, we're now moving into Kherson, where we've seen the Russians apparently getting it handed to them today terribly. And I'm not lying at all when I say that or exaggerating in any way. It seems that a Russian stockpile right outside of Kherson in the city of Chornyobayivka has been destroyed today as it lit up like a Roman candle.
Вот это пизду, блядь. Ти шо, от это там їх упалили, єбать, іще дали.
So we can see it getting lit up over there. This guy sounds like he's having quite a time watching it.
Іще, ніхуя себе, от это їх вдарили. Ого-го. Та ти шо?
So you see that the artillery keeps on raining down out there. It's right on the supply depot. I'm actually going to skip forward a little bit to right here,
От это да,
where you can see something a little interesting happen. That was a little bit of a bigger explosion than the normal artillery explosion, which, as far as I've been able to collect, was the stockpile exploding right there. So we're going to watch that again. That's probably 1,000 tons or more of Russian ammunition just exploding all at one time out there incredibly quickly from what I've been able to collect. So, once again, good to see. And we know that the Russians are probably going to be having a lot of logistical areas around Kherson, and their situation may become that much more worse.
Вот это да. О-хо-хо-хо.
So with that, we're going to cut this video short because beyond that, it's nothing more than silence and dogs barking. And so we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we did get proof today that there were once again explosions at the Kherson airport. The Russians never learn, and they haven't learned here either. And they set up they set up a logistical base at the Kherson International Airport before, and it got attacked by the Ukrainians and got wiped out. The Russians then returned, set up the exact same supply depot at the exact same airport, and got struck again. And today, we got the footage of the explosions occurring at the Kherson airport again, which shows that they did, in fact, get struck at again at the airport. So you hear the report of the rockets in the distance as they're slamming down on the airport and destroying the Russian supply depot that they set up again. And it's just so silly at this point that the Russians are this incompetent. Hardly ever see anything like this, but the Russians will give this to you daily. This is a common sight for them. And so with that, we're now going to move out to sea, where we've gotten more news on the Black Sea Fleet today. We actually have a list of all the ships, an infographic in a way, of all the Russian ships in the Black Sea Fleet. As we can see here, there's their entire roster, and we can see the ships that have been destroyed marked in red. First, we have the Orsk. For some reason on here, they marked it as the Summeron or something like that, but it's actually the Orsk. So that red X should actually be moved down to this ship in particular. So the Orsk was destroyed. I believe one of these other ships here was heavily damaged, and we know that one of these here to the left, I forgot what the specific project name for these are, but one of these was also heavily damaged, and it appeared to have lost bridge control and started to take a hard rudder left out further at sea. So I don't know the condition of these the ship that was damaged there, but the Moskva sank today. It was the only ship of its class in the Black Sea Fleet. And then it's saying that this ship was destroyed as well, but I don't actually have any information, and I never really got any news on this ship being destroyed. Let's see if we can find the Vasily Baikov in this list. I feel like it's actually one of these, but I don't really want to say for sure. Then again, the Vasily Baikov wasn't destroyed, as we found out. But then again, a lot of people are saying maybe they just painted up the other ship of its class with the same number set and then set it off to sea and said, hey, look, the Vasily Baikov wasn't destroyed. But then again, we've seen, moving on from that the entirety of the Black Sea Fleet's submarines have not been destroyed or damaged in any way, which shows that their probably merchant ship interdiction is probably incredibly strong, and no cargo ships are probably getting into Ukrainian ports in any way that are still under Ukrainian control. So with that, we're now going to move on, because I have gotten extremely alarming and disturbing news today. No one said it could be done. Not a soul. No one said that the Moskva would ever return to a Russian port. No, everyone said when that ship sank, it would never, ever be recovered. The weapons on board, we're not entirely sure about them, but we're very sure that the Russians will probably try and keep a close guard on the location that the Moskva was last sunk in, and they'll make sure that no one comes out there and tries to conduct a salvage operation on any of the weapons or equipment that is found inside of the Moskva, or to try and refloat the ship as a whole if it's manageable. Today we can see that that apparently is not going to be the case, as we've seen that the Ukrainians are starting to launch salvage operations of their own to apparently try and get the Moskva back under their control and bring it on under the Ukrainian flag and the Ukrainian Navy. I hope that this isn't too much of disturbing news and unbelievable news to y'all, but we have seen that the farmers have smelled blood. Not only this, but we can actually see that the farmers, in fact, put together an incredibly quickly devised makeshift floating tractor and are actually hauling the Moskva back to Ukrainian port. Hopefully they're able to get the ship running in. Once again, I want to say to everyone, hopefully that hyped y'all up, but this is entirely a joke. I thought we'd have a funny little laugh before we went on to the last bit of funny, real news that occurred today. But still, I wonder if the Ukrainians are actually going to try any sort of salvage operations to recover any of the weaponry on board the ship now that it's at the bottom of the Black Sea. I don't know how deep the Black Sea is, so diving operations probably won't be possible, but maybe they could contract out some kind of submersibles to go to the ship and try and see if anything is recoverable off of it, if there is no threat from the Russian Navy while they're doing it. So we're now going to move on to the last bit of news today before we move on to all of the questions, where we can see that the the Russian embassy inside the United States apparently had a bit of a cat and mouse gameplay today, as Ukrainian flags were projected onto the embassy and the Russians tried to put them out. It appears that they weren't able to with any kind of great success, and so here's the video. It's just funny. So you see they're trying to put the Ukrainian flag on the embassy, and the Russians have some kind of large spotlight trying to drown out the flags.
They're trying to drown you out. That's gotta be, they gotta be the Russians. They're trying to drown you out. There's the Russian embassy. What? Yeah, you guys are communicating back and forth. There we go.
You can see he's kind of like jogging it around. The guy who's controlling it is kind of like bouncing it around like it's walking. It's pretty funny.
Oh!
And so with that, we have actually reached the end of today's news. I hope you all have all enjoyed it so much. It seems like we've actually have a lot of new viewers that have come in tonight. And so if so, once again, welcome. Make sure to join the Discord if you like. We have a very active community that likes to discuss the events of the war and other things that are occurring around the world. So if you'd like to be a part of that community, make sure to do so. Also, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It does help out the stream a lot, and it helps us to reach even more people. So if you're very appreciative of finding the stream and you really think that this is some good quality info, make sure to like it to help out others, because then they'll also be able to see the news as well. So with that, We have reached the end of the news for today, and we'll begin the question segment and start answering all of the questions that we've brought in from a super chat, and then we'll also answer some questions from the live chat in general. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right. So first up, we have a $50 donation from Tim Q, who says, Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini, and thank you so much for the support. It does mean a lot to us, and it helps us to run the channel. And so with that being said, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from BC Skyman, who says, Eastern Ukraine, Donbass, and Luhansk region are predominantly Russian-speaking people. Will the Russian soldiers destroy, murder, and kill all the civilians there as well?
I don't think it's off the table. We can already see that large amounts of damage have been caused to Severodonetsk and Izyum, which are within the Donbass regions for the large part, although Izyum, I believe, is actually in the Kharkiv Oblast. So I think that they actually will. I don't think they're really discriminate about it, because Mariupol is in the Russian-speaking areas of the country, and it's in particular in the Donetsk Oblast. Nonetheless, we see that they're killing civilians there to a very high degree. So I think that they would kill civilians nonetheless, even if they are speaking Russian. So I hope that does answer the question in a way, at least as far as my opinion can answer it. And so I thank you so much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And just for everybody in the chat mentioning the buffering issues, there's actually no storm in the area tonight, so I'm not sure why it's having an issue, but please try refreshing the page, and hopefully that should help it. I do notice on my end it is also buffering as well, so hopefully it clears up here in just a moment. But anyways, our next question is from Praise Adonai, who puts in a $15 donation and says, I believe Putin is getting to a high point of frustration. One more battleship or massive defeat may push him to the limited nuclear option. He is weakening and unstable. What does the enforcer say?
The enforcer says, I think the guy is pretty weak in general. We haven't seen him follow through on any of his threats so far. You would think that such a crushing defeat, because losing the Moskva is a huge deal. It was the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, which I believe... Let's pull up all the fleets the Russians have, actually. Let's do a deep dive on that real quick. So, Russian fleets. Let's see what they have. They have the Black Sea Fleet, the Baltic Fleet, and then they have, I believe, a couple of others. I believe they have the Pacific Fleet, but I'm not really sure. So hang on just a second, everyone. We're going to look through the fleets they have. They have the Northern Fleet, the Baltic and Black Sea Fleets. They also have the Caspian Flotilla, and then they have the Pacific Fleet. So they have one... We're not going to count the flotilla. We're just going to count the fleets. They have 1, 2, 3, 4 fleets. So out of the 4 fleets, there will be 4 flagships, and there, of course, is probably a flagship of the Caspian Flotilla. But nonetheless, they have lost the flagship of one of their fleets. Also, just for y'all to know, it appears that the... Let me make sure this is correct. It appears that the Slava class is also the flagship of the Pacific Fleet, and let's see here. Let me make sure. Doesn't look like there's one in the Baltic Fleet, and the Kirov class battle cruisers are of the Northern Fleet. So it appears that the Slava classes, there's only 3 of them. One of them was the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet. One of them is the flagship of the Pacific Fleet, and then they have the last Slava class in the Northern Fleet. So they've lost one of the flagships and one of the 3 Slava class ships they have. So it was a huge loss, but I don't think it was as such a crushing defeat and a loss as the Russian withdrawal from the Northern and Northeastern fronts, because that was a huge deal in every regard. So I do think that he is getting on the brink of getting extremely pissed. We've even seen him call off the peace talks, which was kind of like a exit out. So I'm not really sure where this is going to go, but I hope that input does give a bit of an idea of what I'm thinking about it. So I thank you so much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, so I just noticed that we lost about 3,000 viewers in probably about 5 seconds, and there are many people saying that they cannot hear us. So if you can hear us, please put in the chat yes, just the word yes, so I can know that some people are at least hearing us. If not, Enforcer, I'm not sure if there's anything you can check on your end to see if we're online still. It looks like everybody's still saying we're having major issues.
Yikes. There's not really much I can do on my end though. Because let me put that back down. But there's not really much I can do because if I try and go through OBS and do this again, it's going to shut down the stream and restart it. So there's not really much I can do to fix this. It does show though on my Wi-Fi that we're getting full reception over here, and I am picking up your call fine. So I think it may be a problem with the stream itself instead of on our end.
Okay, well, yeah, just a quick tip. If anybody can still hear me, try refreshing your page and try downgrading your resolution on the stream itself. That might help. YouTube might be having an issue, so I'm not so sure. I'm not seeing anybody putting yes in the chat. So let's see here. Mm, I'm not sure if anybody can hear us actually because it looks like everybody's saying they cannot. Hmm. So, Enforcer, do you want me to sort of hold off or continue with the questions since it appears that not many people can hear us?
Let's see real quick if we can throw down, refresh the YouTube page in the live chat and see if people can manage to do that. Let's see if they'll fix it. Okay, so refreshing didn't work for some and refreshing worked for others. But before we go through the rest of the super chats or just end the stream preemptively, I'm going to see if we can try and salvage it to everyone else who could still hear and make sure to get everyone's questions out that they sent in super chats for and also some other people's questions.
And for everyone mentioning to fix the router, unfortunately, if we were to restart the router, that would be a very long process for us. So that would probably be a 10 or 15-minute disruption. So we're going to try to avoid doing that. I'm trying to check our Wi-Fi settings right now to see if there's anything I can do to get that fixed. Um, so yeah, if you can hear us clearly, please put it in the chat and give us some kind of signal here if we can continue. Um, it looks like I'm still getting reports from multiple people in Discord that they cannot hear us at all. So at this point, I'm wondering if maybe YouTube's getting hacked or
Well,
something of that nature.
actually, someone
Because
just said that apparently there was a solar flare today. Let's pull that up, solar flare news, and see if there was a solar flare. Geomagnetic storm from sun to hit Earth today. Radio blackout likely. So I think.
Oh, okay, well that's probably what it is. Let me put that in the chat. So yeah, a lot of people are also saying geomagnetic storm, solar flares. So that's probably what it is. I did not know that was going to happen today, but now we know.
Huh. So people are saying DDoS,
Yeah, it's buffering really badly on my end as well.
Yeah, people are saying DDoS, geomagnetic storm. Start a new stream. Maybe I ought to just start a new stream and just say day 50 questions or something.
Yeah, that could possibly work. Worst case scenario, we're not gonna. If anybody can hear me, we're not gonna skip anybody's super chat questions. If we can't get them answered tonight for some unforeseen reason, we will ask them tomorrow. So don't worry about it. But we're gonna see if we can potentially salvage this thing right now.
Also, try and send that out through the chat just in case that they can't hear us still. And I'm going to end this stream here in 1 minute, so that way everyone can have time to read the message if y'all are able to hear me right now. And we're going to start a new stream where it's just us answering the questions. So stand by, everyone, and we'll be back here in a second. So I'm just going to give it a minute, and the stream will shut down.
Okay, some people were saying that the lagging is gone or stopped. So let's see here. Is anybody able to hear me right now? If you can,
Okay,
say
it's
yes,
fixed.
Matt.
It's fixed. Everyone's saying yes now.
Okay, good deal then.
Let's see here though. Can I run a poll right here?
Should be able to.
Let's see. Let me check here real quick and see if I can run a poll. I can't run it from the phone. I have to go to the YouTube here on the computer. But everyone's saying yes, so it looks like
Well,
we're all
it looks like pretty much everybody's saying yes.
yeah. So with that, hopefully no one else is having any issues, and we're just going to continue on with the questions here instead of going to a new stream. So with that, what do we got?
All right, so next up we have a $10 chat from Brooks Precision, who says, "Let's go Ukraine and push the criminals out."
That's right. I do entirely agree, and I hope that the Ukrainians do manage to push the Russians out and back to the borders that they were originally at within the Donbass and Crimea, and maybe even try and push back through the Donbass and recapture those. But nonetheless, I thank you so much for the support, and I'm glad that the lag finally got over. Looks like something externally happened to us. I'm not really sure if it was the sun or whatever, but we got through it. So with that, we're moving on to the next question.
All right, and the next one is a $10 super chat from Junebug72, who says, "Thank you and Slava Ukraine."
And thank you so much, and Slava Ukraini. It means a lot to us, and it does help us to run the channel. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and next up we have a $10 donation from Brian Waitikas, who says, "They did announce what was being sent for the 800 million. It includes several Soviet-era helicopters, Bradleys, and more Switchblades. I'd like to hear your opinion, and hopefully you put up a VPN. Slava Ukraine."
Bradleys? Did he say Bradleys?
Yes.
Wow. Bradleys are an incredibly good infantry fighting vehicle, in my opinion. Of course, there's a movie out there called Pentagon Wars, but if you look into the history of who that's based around, you figure out that they're like wild people on meth or something that made that movie trying to trash on the Bradley. But the Bradley is a pretty good infantry fighting vehicle, and if we're sending those to Ukraine with TOW missile launchers on that thing, TOW 2 missile launchers, and also a pretty decent 30mm autocannon, the Ukrainians will be in pretty good business depending on how many they get. So I thank you so much for the support and sharing that info with us, and I think that is an incredibly good thing as far as the support that's being delivered. And of course, helicopters will help out the Ukrainians in many regards, especially with transport. So with that being said, I thank you so much, and we're moving on to the next question.
And I want to recognize a $2 donation from Mamba Mentality. And Mamba, actually, we had stopped asking the question, so you didn't miss anything once we realized the lag was going on. So we are picking up where we left off. And also, I want to recognize a $2 donation from Takata Store. Next up, I want to recognize a couple of more donations. We have a few $10 donations from Vigo, Simon Gardner, and Mark Sova. Thank you all for your donations to the channel. They are greatly, greatly appreciated. And next up, we have a $10 donation from Greg Carmen, who says, "Just appreciate the nightly updates and Slava Ukraine."
And I thank you so much for appreciating them. We, of course, try and make sure that the news is as good as possible. Unfortunately, we cannot guarantee the stream quality as far as the Wi-Fi is concerned, sadly. And I hate when this stuff happens, and I'm not really sure why it happened tonight. But once again, I do thank you so much. It does mean a lot. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a $10 super chat from TJ Johnson, who says, "Is there a way to add the links from your daily videos to your Discord channel since you're having difficulties with your maps? Thanks for all the effort you do putting into the daily reports."
Thank you very much for the support. And if you're talking about putting the maps into the Discord, I did used to do that, but it kind of became redundant because of the map. If the map worked on the stream, you know, like in the links below, it worked in the Discord as well. And if it doesn't work on the stream, it doesn't also work on the Discord. So if I try to upload this map anywhere, considering that it's saying that it's saving, it's actually going to show day 49 instead of day 50 right now. And so when I click refresh, it's actually going to remove all of these news markers off of the map for today. Then it's actually going to return it to its original day 49 state. So unfortunately, that wouldn't work. But I do thank you for the suggestion and the support as well. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question. And before we move on, how many super chats do we have left?
So it looks like we have about 15 or so left.
All right. And with that being said, on to the next question.
And I just want to say I appreciate everybody's Discord messages trying to keep me informed here. I'm trying to read them all. But anyways, moving on to the next super chat we have is a $10 donation from KB Rugger 90, who says there are over 100 MiGs in NATO Europe, and the U.S. Bought 21 MiG-29s from Moldova in the 80s. Let's send them all ASAP.
I do agree. I think that would be an incredibly smart move. The question is, how do we get them over there without making the Russians go to war with the West immediately? One guy said the idea of actually just driving them down the road, pulling them by some kind of tractor and bringing them across the border that way, and that would get around the Russians' threat that if an aircraft flew into Ukraine from the West, they would consider that an act of war against them, because it wouldn't be flying in, it would be driving in. So I thank you very much for the support, and I do agree that we should send over those aircraft right away. So thank you once again, and with that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
All right. And I'm not sure what's going on with the chat. Everybody's saying yes, Matt. Now I'm not sure if the chat is really, really far behind or not, but I don't know what's going on with that. Hopefully it's still working properly. But the next one we have is a $10 donation from KB Rugger 90 once again, who says, how about backfilling the MiGs with U.S. oldest F-16s and add in at least one F-35 to get on the correct path? Got to upper ramp production of all NATO planes and missiles.
I do agree with the idea of sending over the MiGs, but the early version F-16s do throw a little bit of a wrench into the whole situation. You see, the thing is that none of the Ukrainian pilots, as far as I know, have been trained on Western aircraft systems, and it takes a while to learn a new kind of aircraft. So I don't really think the Ukrainians would actually be able to use the F-16s or the F-35, and what would be very scary about sending over the F-35 is that if it somehow crashed over Russian-controlled territory, that would be brand new American technology that would be pretty much handed over to the Russians in a way, kind of accidentally, but still nonetheless, it would be handing over vital information to them about the classified technology of our aircraft. So I thank you so much for the support. I do agree sending over the MiG-29 seems like a great idea, but sending over American stuff, I think it'd be mostly useless to the Ukrainians, and then sending over some very advanced tech like an F-35 could be dangerous to national security. So I thank you so much for the support, and with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from BSG Wolf, who says, Russia has warned USA to stop supplying arms. Do you think Russia is inching to strike U.S. forces?
No, they've been saying that for ever since the beginning of the war. They've been telling us to stop sending supplies, and we haven't really cared, and we just keep on sending it. The one line they did draw, though, that was clear, is that if we flew an aircraft, they would go to war. But with the supplies, they just keep on saying, stop that, don't do that, and we just keep on sending it in without any regard for those warnings, and they haven't done anything yet. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question in brief. And so with that being said, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Bob A, who says, Enforcer, isn't this called spray and pray style of marksmanship?
Yes, it is. And that's a terrible way to shoot, because you can't hit anything shooting like that. And it's just a waste. It's a waste of ammo. It's a waste of time. You might as well not even be there if you're going to suck that bad. Just go home. These guys in terms of their actual fighting abilities on film, they hit rock bottom and dug out and grabbed a shovel and kept on digging past rock bottom. So I thank you very much for the support, but those guys are doing spray and pray, and they suck at what they do. And so I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Man, and I'm seeing more people say that the stream is back down again. I'm not sure if the chat is just behind or is it actually down again. But anyways, we're going to have to keep going and hopefully it clears itself up. So the next one we have is from Knuckles, who puts in a $20 donation. He says, it might be a little off, Ukraine, but what's your thought if the far right woman wins France and leaves NATO? Do you think that will hurt NATO? And also, what would a war between Russia and China versus NATO look like? Keep up the great work.
First off, I don't think Russia and China would actually ally with each other enough for them to go to war jointly against the West. The Chinese and the Russians don't really trust each other, and it's kind of an uneasy agreement in between the two right now, because we can see that the Chinese made some kind of special relationship with the Russians during the Olympics, and then they backed out of it nearly immediately as soon as the Russians committed to their part of the bargain in a way. So I don't think that there would be a joint war of both these countries fighting the West, but if there was, the Chinese are a paper tiger in a way. Their economy would get destroyed immediately once their foreign export market had shriveled up. Their economy would begin to shrink, and they wouldn't really have the ability to face the United States at sea, which is where the major part of the war would be fought for them, and then they would be relegated to mainland China and just waiting for some kind of naval invasion from the United States. If the Russians decided to go into a war in the West, here in Europe, it would pretty much just be a steamroller with the United States just wiping the Russians out, along with Germany and Britain. France, though, considering that the Le Pen, let's look at Le Pen. Le Pen. Let's see here. Member of the National Assembly. Let's see here. Over 50% needed to win. She got a lower percentage by almost 2 million people than Macron did, so I don't think she'll win in the second round, because she's about a whole 5 points behind Macron. So in a second round of voting, I think she'll lose, hopefully. But nonetheless, if she did win and France withdrew from NATO, I don't really feel like it'd be too much of a damaging thing to the French. You do have to remember that historically, Charles de Gaulle actually denied the Americans permission to have forces inside of France. And also, they've kind of been an uneasy member of NATO from the start in a way. But still, they are an important member, but if they withdrew, there's not really much lost. We still have Germany, and we still have Poland, which are really the two most important land masses on the European continent as far as their strategic value and also their military and size. The British, while being an island and not really actually attached to mainland Europe, do serve an important kind of like backup force for the United States with their military, such as the somewhat small but very high-tech Royal Navy and the British Army, as well as the Royal Air Force. So I don't really think the French would be too important to holding Europe in a way or making sure that NATO stays unified and strong, but I hope that does answer the question, and I thank you very much for the return support, Knuckles. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a couple more super chats from Bob A. Thank you very much, Bob, for your continued support. We very much appreciate it. The next one he has is a $10 donation and says, Enforcer, updated information on the sunk Russian cargo ship is the Saratov and not the Orsk. They are sister ships. The Orsk was originally identified, but this was changed in recent news reports.
Interesting. Let me go see if the name of that ship on that list was the Saratov. It was. So thank you very much for sharing that info with us. I actually didn't know that they had changed the identification of it, but nonetheless, I guess it doesn't really matter because they were ships of the same class. And but nonetheless, I do thank you for clarifying that tidbit of info for us. It does help us to identify things more accurately. And so with that being said, we're moving on to the next question.
And next up is Bob A. Once again, he says, Enforcer, any thoughts on Medvedev's weird comments about Finland and Sweden NATO movements today? Slava Ukraine.
I haven't actually heard about Medvedev's comments on Sweden and Finland. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to declare ignorance on those because I've been following the news about Sergei having a heart attack and also the news down here in the war itself. Although it's been somewhat quiet today, there was still a large amount of news down here. So I thank you very much for the support. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to still claim ignorance on it because I haven't actually heard the comments to talk about them myself. And so I thank you very much for the support. Sorry I couldn't answer the question. And with that being said, we're now moving on to the next one.
And next up, I want to recognize an $8 donation from longtime channel supporter Speedbreak. Thank you very much for your donation. Next up, we have a super chat from RDY4THDL who puts in an $8 donation and says, "Thank you, Enforcer and Matt. Why aren't Ukraine forces taking out the Russian convoys moving east and south within Ukraine?"
I actually covered this a while ago in depth on stream. It was a question similar to that one, and the reason is that usually the convoys are covered by a large deal of air support, and so it's very hard to bring in drones and aircraft to attack these convoys because it would be more of it would turn more so into a dogfight trying to manage to gain air supremacy over the convoy instead of actually directing it. Like directly attacking it, I mean. So that's kind of like the rundown of it. It's really the air support issue that the Russians are causing over the convoys themselves. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question in brief. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a $5 super chat from Brooks Precision, who says, "I heard only 14 people survived off that Russian ship."
Really? Now, if that's true, that's something wild. I wonder how bad the ammo detonation was, and I wonder if we'll ever get any pictures to show the damage that was caused to the Moskva itself. Because if only 14 people survived, I expect the entire front of that ship disappeared in the ammo explosion. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does address that in a way. And I do thank you for providing that information with us, and we will try and make sure to verify that information and see if only 14 crew members survived the explosion. If so, that means that the admiral on board that flagship, if he was there, may have been killed. And so with that, thank you so much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Shibari Killians, who says, "Have you ever thought that red backpack guy is propaganda? Someone the Russians can recognize as being alive, but you just give another guy a red bag."
Yes, I have thought about that. A lot of what the Russians do is fabricated and staged. But nonetheless, I kind of have to take things for face value, even if they do come from the Russians, and assume that Red Backpack Man is the same man. And regardless, even if it is a replacement, it doesn't really matter all too much because, it's just one guy in the end. It's kind of like Belarusian Mustache Man on the Ukrainian side. Like, they could get another Belarusian Mustache Man. But nonetheless, we just assume it's the same guy doing the same things. But I do thank you for the support, and I have thought about that occasionally. And so, with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Victor's Laboratory, who says, "Oh, the irony. The defenders of Snake Island are alive, and the attackers of Snake Island are now dead."
Yeah, it is very ironic because it was both the Vasily Baikov and the Moskva that approached Snake Island and attacked it. It appears that the Moskva apparently did most of the damage, and the Vasily Baikov supported it as well. Unfortunately, from what we've heard, the Vasily Baikov actually survived and was not destroyed by the Ukrainians, but now we know that the Moskva, which was a much more important target, has now sank to the bottom of the sea. So I thank you very much for the support, and I do thank you for pointing that out. So with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one we have is from Jonathan White, coming in with the Chernobyl miniseries reference. He says, "RBMK reactors don't explode, and Russian warships don't get hit by anti-ship missiles."
He's delusional. Take him to the infirmary. But I thank you so much for the support, and I do like the comment. I love the Chernobyl miniseries. That is an incredibly good show, and it shows that when nuclear power is operated by incompetent people, it can be incredibly dangerous, which is something that everyone should always be vigilant on looking out for. Because I think, now this is weighing in on my personal opinion on things, I do think that nuclear power is the direction of the future. It's a very clean source of energy, and it's also an incredibly powerful source of energy and can produce a lot of electricity in such a small area of land. So I think it's the future. It kind of appeases both sides in a way. But when it's run by incompetent people, it can lead to very dangerous and deadly results. But I do thank you so much for the little comment. I like the joke. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a super chat from VMan29397, who says, "I want to congratulate Russia on the creation of the Moskva artificial reef. It will now be the home for countless sea life with a much better role."
I do agree. I think that the Russians are trying to get kind of a green thumb in a way. And so it looks like they're starting to stretch their legs, at least with the Moskva first. And I think that once they see that the Moskva was an incredibly successful artificial reef, they'll add the rest of the Black Sea fleet to it. So I thank you so much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Honest M, who says U.S. approved new package for Ukraine to deploy Chuck Norris to Ukraine with custom Dick Cheney caliber bullets.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and it's very interesting to hear that America is sending one of its best over there. We also know that they're sending over many other of America's best. They're sending over the kids from Red Dawn, Freddy Fazbear, and a whole bunch of other interesting people and characters to fight in Ukraine for them. So I thank you so much for the support. Hopefully they all do a little bit of extra effort. And once again, Chuck Norris is using Dick Cheney's bullets, which we know are incredibly powerful. So I thank you so much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Captain, who says, can you talk about the nuclear situation between the West and Russia? What is both sides' status as far as nuclear? Maybe go into detail of certain countries and how they are preparing.
There really is no preparing that we can visibly see going on right now. The situation in between the East and the West has really remained the same for over 50 or 60 years at this point, as far as how a nuclear onslaught would occur. The Russians will, or the United States, will preemptively launch their nukes against the other, and then in turn, the other country, the receiver of the nuclear onslaught, will then launch its missiles towards the other country. There, you can get into a whole load of detail about how it will probably go down and all that stuff, but really in the end, it's just going to be two countries launching nuclear weapons at each other and blowing each other into smithereens. That's kind of just the simplified rundown of it, and there's really no need to get more complex than that, because that's really what it just turns into, you know, regardless of the actual breakdown of it. No countries really look like they're preparing for it. The only country that actually prepared for it historically is the Swiss, and so they're the only country that actually has some kind of protection from nuclear weapons, considering how many fallout shelters they have built. And it's also required by law in Switzerland that every single building in the country must have a fallout shelter built into it. So they're the only country that's really prepared, and once again, it took them decades to prepare, and it took them literal passings of laws to actually make that a thing. So no one else is really preparing. If it happens, it happens, and unfortunately, a lot of people will be in a bad situation then. But I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question in brief. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a super chat from Tony Go, who says, according to Newsweek, the loss of the Moskva is a $750 million loss to the Russian military.
I did hear that, and that may be the single largest loss of capital, both in ship and money, that they've had during the course of this entire war in a single instant. $750 million is huge. That's actually as large as the last round of aid that the United States has sent over to Ukraine, just for context. So I thank you very much for sharing that info with us, and it does go to show that the sinking of the Moskva it was a huge loss budgetarily and morale-wise, and also firepower-wise for the Russians. It was really a loss in every single regard you can imagine. So I thank you once again, and with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a super chat from Zyper Sniper 1, who says, looks like we're getting closer and closer to World War III. So if the war starts and ends, would the West occupy Russia for X amount of years, just like the U.S. did with Japan after World War II? Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini. And in a situation like that, where the Russians did not use their nuclear weapons and we managed to steamroll them, we would probably have to push them back all the way to the Urals, which is somewhere over here near the city of Perm. But I don't think that would be really difficult for the United States to do. We see how incompetent the Russians are here in Ukraine, fighting a minor rate power. And so if they were fighting a world superpower like the United States, I can entirely tell you that we would roll them over. I mean, like, that's not propaganda. That's not taking a biased take. That's looking at this truthfully and saying the Russians just don't stand a chance, and they know it as well. So we would probably roll through, and then we'd end up doing, like, probably what we did in Iraq, honestly. You know, you're using Japan as an example, but we actually hung out in Iraq for a long time. We would let them set up another government. Of course, it would be self-determining, like, you know, a democracy. We would sit there a while, probably fight the insurgents, try and bolster the government we set up there, and then leave and pray to God that it doesn't fall apart within days of trying to leave, much like Afghanistan. So I thank you very much for the support, and I think that's what we would see if the United States actually conducted a conventional war against the Russians or vice versa, and the United States ended up winning. Well, really, the Western world ended up winning against the Russians. So I thank you so much for the support. Hope that does answer the question. And with that being said, we're moving on to the next one.
And next up is a super chat from Darkside66, who says, long-time listener here, but first-time chatter. Can you explain the leaf spring joke for us new peoples?
Okay, so first off, if everyone could put Leaf Spring Army in the chat, would highly appreciate that, so that way everyone can show the support the Leaf Spring Army's got amongst its ranks. And now to explain the story. I was on a stream weeks ago. It was a long time ago at this point. But I was on there and I was watching a video of a destroyed Panzer AA system that was burning in the middle of a field. So the guy who was filming the video walked around the backside of the Panzer, and I saw a leaf spring suspension system on the rear axle of the vehicle. So I said, wow, the leaf springs are so outdated. Like, no one uses those anymore. That's got to be antiquated equipment. So I pulled it up to make sure I was right saying that, and found out I was wrong immediately, which I detracted. I was like, oh, well, this car and this car uses it, so it can't be that antiquated because those are brand new models of car. But then I went and looked in the live chat, and people were murdering me over that comment. So honestly, I found it really funny that that out of all the things I've ever said and done, that was the thing that got people violent in a way. And so it actually turned into a joke. I thought it was funny, and somehow it turned into a joke as well, so it kind of went in that direction. And so it's just kind of been a thing now, and it was kind of like a goof that really turned into the defining moment of this channel, and the chat's called the Leaf Spring Army over that joke, and it's really just turned into kind of like a Leaf Spring culture somehow. But I thank you very much for the question, and I hope that does explain the origin story of the Leaf Spring Army. As you can see, the chat went crazy there for a little bit saying Leaf Spring Army, which shows you the amount of support the Leaf Spring Army's got. So I thank you once again for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a super chat from Jesse Rogers, who says, I've been here every night since day 17 and love your views. I was doing my own research, but the gore was so hard and this was so much better. Thank you, and Slava Ukraine.
I thank you very much for the support, and I want you to know that in the process of collecting this news, I actually see all the gore that you were seeing, but I've never had a break from it. I see this every day. So if that gives you a context of what I go through to get this news out to y'all, and the terrible things I see, that would give you a pretty good idea is getting in my shoes, which it appears you have. So I hope you do. I hope that gives you an extra level of appreciation of how much I subject myself to just looking at the stuff to try and compile the news. And I thank you so much for being a huge supporter. And being here since day 17 has been a while. That's been nearly 35 days at this point, over a month. So I thank you so much for watching over and over. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And I think we're going to have to go ahead and put a cutoff on the super chat so we have time to get to our live chat question. Up next here, we have another $20 donation from Knuckles, who says, I believe we left quite a bit of weapons to Al-Qaeda when we left. They have now put an embassy in Russia, and I've also heard that they smuggled some weapons to them as well. Is there any way they could get the weapons we left behind?
I don't think that the Afghans have smuggled weapons to them. I haven't really heard anything about that, and I don't really think the Afghans are considered an arms supplier in a way, they're really, honestly, to describe the entire country, and this isn't saying anything mean, this is just the honest economic truth about Afghanistan. It's kind of it's a backwater country. There's nothing really impressive industrially or anything really about Afghanistan. It's almost a broke country. It has no industry to speak of, and it hardly has a GDP. The people there are incredibly poor, sadly, due to that, and so I don't really think they're going to be a huge arms supplier to the Russians if they are. But to answer that question, if they were to send weapons, there was a large amount that were left over. That is true. They have Blackhawks, M4s, and so on that were left behind. So that could be the case that they are, in fact, giving over M4s to the Russians, but I don't think the Russians would really want them because they would have to try and supply the 5.56 NATO rounds, the 2.23 if you want to call them that. And I don't really think they're game to do that, really, and I don't really think they have the ability to. I know that they use the 5.45 by 39 rounds, but those are still a different caliber, and you'd have to retool equipment to be able to create the 5.56 NATO rounds. So I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question in a way, at least as far as I know and my assumptions can take me. So take it with a grain of salt, but I thank you so much for the support once again. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from BSG Wolf, who says, in my Army artillery days, we had white phosphorus shells, but we trained to set the fuses to air burst. So I doubt the MLRS there was phosphorus.
Well, I thank you very much for the info. And even if it was white phosphorus, because those didn't look like normal HE to me. And we've seen a lot of footage of different kinds of explosives. Of course, artillery fire is nothing but high explosive. Of course, they're not firing armor piercing or anything. Well, unless they're firing at tanks, probably. But I don't know about that. That's getting into a realm I really don't know a lot about munitions with. But that looked a lot like the white phosphorus pictures and explosions that we've seen the Russians commit. But instead of being an air burst, they exploded on impact with the ground. So I thank you very much for giving us that info. But I'm still not really sure. I'm still not entirely convinced that they were not white phosphorus, because they did look a lot like the pictures of the white phosphorus we've seen used before. So I thank you very much for the support, and I will look into that a lot more and study it. And considering the information you've given, I'll definitely put that and weigh that in, since you have had prior service and experience with white phosphorus explosives. And so I thank you so much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Dozer242, or really more of a comment, who says, I keep hearing about Russians complaining about Ukraine shelling Russian mainland. Keep up the excellent work. You guys are the best.
Well, I thank you so much for the support. I do enjoy that a lot of people love these streams. It means a lot to me. And also, one thing that's interesting to me is that we get a lot more views on our streams than most other people do when they run Ukraine war streams, which tells me that apparently the information I'm putting out must be like A-rated or something, because you would be thinking that other channels would also get huge viewership, considering that they're so much larger than me, but nonetheless they don't, which is odd to me. But I don't know, maybe my format's better. I don't know. I'm not going into that. But anyways, thank you so much for supporting the channel. And I haven't really heard a lot about the Ukrainians shelling the Russian mainland per se with like artillery strikes, but we have heard a lot about helicopter raids and cruise missile attacks and such things like that. So I thank you so much for the support. And that's kind of the information I've gotten on it so far. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And we just have a few more super chats until we get to our live chat questions. Next up is a super chat from CA Lags, who says, now that the Ukrainians have attacked the Moskva, when do you think they'll attack Moskva?
Oh, he's talking about Moscow, like the city. It's spelled the same way you see in Russian here. It's actually pronounced Moskva. But I don't think they will. I think the best they could ever do is maybe trying to get lucky and have a cruise missile launch that flies all the way from Ukrainian territory to Moscow. But I think that would be something they wouldn't be willing to risk, because if they attacked Moscow directly, the Russians would try and mobilize everything. Even if it wasn't successful, and even if they don't have the logistics to do that, they would try and mobilize everything to bring into Ukraine. And then the Ukrainians would be stuck there in a much longer war, in a worser situation. But I'm sure that they'd actually be able to manage it, considering that the logistics situation is so bad for the Russians. But I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question in a way. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Mamba Mentality, who says, we clearly see peace talks isn't in the Russian vocabulary, and they have no intentions of stopping. So is now the best option for Ukraine to push them out?
I think so. I think that's what they're already planning on doing. I think even during the peace talks, their plan is aggressive counterattacks to try and push the Russians off of the land. And so I can't agree that I think that's been their primary goal from the start. Of regardless how the peace talks are going, it's going to give them better leverage in the end if they're actually able to push the Russians out, regardless of their actual strength. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question in a way. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, I want to recognize a $5 donation from Krister Peterson. Thank you very much for your donation. Next up, we have a super chat from Nate Baker, who says, "This is Putin's war for profit. Indiscriminate destruction is purposeful because his oligarchs will own the construction companies that will eventually rebuild the gained land."
I do agree. Could you state that one again, real quick, Matthew?
He's basically saying that the indiscriminate destruction is on purpose, so that way the oligarchs who own the construction companies are going to make a lot of money.
Uh, I don't really know about that, because if the Ukrainians manage to regain all of this land, I don't think the Russian oligarchs will roll through, and the Ukrainians will be more than happy to have their companies and businesses operating to rebuild the country, considering that they hate the oligarchs as well with a burning passion. And also, a lot of the oligarchs, from what we know, have actually dipped and have escaped Russia in a way from what we knew, like weeks ago. So I thank y'all. I thank you so much for the support. But I don't really think it's a money-making operation. I think this is more of a strategic endeavor to make sure that the NATO front line isn't greatly extended, almost by a factor of 2, against the Russians. So I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the question or statement in a way. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a super chat from BSG Wolf again. He says, buffering equals a Russian hex spell. Either that or Enforcer uses Cox cable. And actually, we don't use Cox cable. We use Spectrum, so they're no better.
Yeah, and Spectrum's a lot worse than that, probably. I think Spectrum is the worst internet provider on Earth. I don't really know what causes the outages. Every once in a while, it seems like a DDoS attack, and I know a lot of people are like, oh, the hype. But I really don't know what they are. I mean, like, every time I say something, it's really it's a guess. Except for one time, we had a very good idea one time that it was a DDoS attack, but this time it could have been a solar flare or something. I really don't know. But I thank you so much for the support. And yeah, I hate the stream outages stuff because it kicks people off the stream. They were having a wonderful time watching it, and then they have to go through the crap of having a like a freaking, like, pretty much server outage happen on them, a live stream outage. But still, hey, at least no one has to compete with the ads. I don't run ads on any of my videos because I hate them, and so I don't want anyone else to suffer through that. So I thank you so much for the support. I try and make it tolerable in a way. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Yeah, and I'll say, just for the folks that are sort of naysaying, this time it probably was not a DDoS attack. DDoS is kind of like a buzzword for a lot of people when they sort of think of hacking. But no, this time it's probably like a solar flare or something. I doubt it was a hack. But next up, we have a super chat from David Huss, who says, "How will the MQ-9 Reaper help Ukraine if the U.S. approves of the sale?"
It will help them a little bit. I'm going to have to address a comment here I saw because I'm going to nip this one in the bud. Yeah, I'm going to have to nip that one in the bud real quick. But to address that comment, I think the Reapers will help out the Ukrainians a pretty good bit. They're very similar to the Bayraktars in a way. In terms of their capabilities, drones really fill the same kind of role, just a little bit differently. So I hope that does address that. And I'm also going to address something here real quick, because I just saw someone make a comment in the chat, and I feel like at this point, this might be a setup. So if you've seen Ghost Call's comment about that, if you can read it. It's a little bit earlier in the chat, just about 2 minutes ago. But I've had someone signing up my email, my channel email, to websites, adult websites, to pretty much put it lightly. And so I've been deleting and like flagging these as spam to Google. So I just want everyone to know that if you ever see an Enforcer YouTube account on any of those websites, like if you see them anywhere, people are apparently signing me up for those and then apparently activating them because the email messages are saying that they're being activated. So I'm just deleting them. I'm having nothing to do with it, just in case if those are some kind of scam thing or something. But nonetheless, I'm going to address that because I'm not going to have people in the future going, oh, look, he's on this website, because I'm not going to end up like Ted Cruz's account was at one point and it turned into a meme, because that's not me. So I just wanted to address that real quick. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Daniel Turner, who says, "I saw a YouTube channel that blamed the 52 civilian deaths at the train station on Ukraine. What are your thoughts?"
Well, those people are just stupid. First off, the Ukrainians aren't going to commit a missile attack on Kramatorsk. I get tired of everyone trying to make everything sound like a red flag, well, a false flag. Like, that's like, I feel like at this point, it's almost like a toddler has picked up a brand new term, and they're like, false flag. And so every time anything happens, like in Belgorod, when the helicopter raid occurred on Belgorod, false flag. Like when the attack on Kyiv happened, I swear, it almost seems like people are literally would sit there and say, it's a false flag. The Russians aren't actually attacking Kyiv. It's the Ukrainians attacking Kyiv. Like, everything isn't a false flag, and I feel like a lot of YouTube channels try and get into the stupid conspiracy theory stuff and act like everything on Earth is a false flag. A lot of what you see is what's actually happening. There's a very few exceptions of it, and usually they're very small scale if they are false flags. So I thank you very much for the support. That's kind of what I think about it, and so thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And we just have a couple of super chats left. Next one up is from Anthony K. Smith, who says, Enforcer, some pilots don't like to pollute their aircraft with the enemy symbols, so they use their own country symbol to record the kills.
Very interesting. I didn't know that. So I thank you very much for the information, and thank you very much for the support once again. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is another question from Anthony K. Smith, who says, how do you get on board of a Russian Navy ship? It's not easy. You will need to put on goggles and an air tank and a wetsuit.
I like that. It probably isn't too hard to get onto a Russian Navy ship. Honestly, it's not really too hard to go anywhere that you think is pretty tough. Like, you can really get anywhere as long as you look like you belong being there. Also, if you are able to play the rules really well and read up on them, you can generally go anywhere and everywhere. So, even the ones that are still afloat, I'm sure you could walk on there and throw a frag into the captain's office or something. But I do like that joke. Thank you very much, Anthony K. Smith. You've also been a return supporter here, and it does mean a lot to us, and it does support the channel. And so thank you once again, and thank you for the little joke. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And for our last super chat of the night until we move to our live chat questions is from Honest M, who says, freedom must be better armed than tyranny.
I do agree with you entirely. That is, of course, a quote from Zelensky, and I think it's an incredibly good one that will go down in the books. I haven't heard it before, and I think that was entirely original from him. And the best thing about it is that he said it in English. So it is something that we will have a direct translation for because it was said in our language. Hopefully they can get that translated perfectly into Ukrainian so that way the same meaning isn't lost and it isn't changed in a way, because language to language translations usually aren't perfect. So while we heard it perfectly, a Ukrainian translation of that statement may not come off the same way. So I hope it does, and I thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, how many super chats do we have left?
So we actually just got one more in just about 30 seconds ago. Would you like me to read that one off?
Yes.
Okay, and this one is an $8 donation from Captain, who says, what is your evaluation of Chechen soldiers? Seems like at the start of the war, they were being made out as some type of elite force, and they really aren't that.
They're still being made out as an elite force by the Russians. That's why they show so much footage of them. They try and make the Chechens, if I had to compare it to anything here in America for my American viewers, well, really, I'll compare it to everyone, really. They try and make the Chechens, in American terms, look like Appalachian mountain men, hillbilly people, like they're going to get your ass kind of thing. If we were to put it into Australian terms, they're like the bushwhackers in a way. That's how the Russians are trying to paint them. For the British, they are trying to paint them like the Cockney thugs. I guess that's the best thing I've got in Britain, because y'all really don't have country people per se like other countries do, because your country is so densely populated, there really is no more countryside to it. Or I guess you could say the Welsh. I mean, like the valley people. And that's really all the comparisons I've got. Really, no one else has like the roughneck kind of people that most English-speaking countries have, or if they do, I don't really know about them. But that's what the Russians are trying to portray the Chechens as, and they're still trying to. And right now, with all the videos that keep on coming out of them, they are terrible. They can't even shoot the guns right. So that's kind of my assessment of it, and that's kind of what I think they're trying to make the Chechens look like, at least in their in their nation's eyes. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does address the comment and well, the question in a way. And so with that, do we have any more super chats left? And if we don't, let's get to the questions from the live chat.
So we are now all out of super chats. So we are now moving on to the moment of the night everybody's been waiting for. We are finally getting to our live chat questions. So first up, we have one from Bill K, who says, "Do you think Russia is giving their troops amphetamines or stimulants or other drugs like the Germans did in World War II?"
Yes, I do believe that they can. Also, I didn't mean to offend anyone in those comments. I'm just going off of the stereotypes. Don't take it personally if you are one of those people. Alabama people are in that category, so, you know, of like American hillbillies. So don't sit there and think I'm trying to throw smoke in y'all's direction. Okay, so moving on from that, yes, I think that they are probably giving some of their soldiers amphetamines, and that's not really unheard of even in modern wars with the United States, because there was a report done that showed that around 50% of the U.S. pilots in the Gulf War were using some kind of amphetamines. So it's not unheard of to pretty much be juicing or drugged up in a way during a war. It does help, at least in the short term, but then the crash is usually pretty rough, and that's been the usual historical account. But it does help them in the short-term goals that they need to achieve. So I think that the Russians are probably issuing some kind of drugs here and there, or some kind of unofficial thing that they're doing to try and up their efficiency for a short amount of time. But I do thank you for the support, and I hope that does address the question in a way. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to our next question.
And real quick before I move on, one of the users who sent in a couple of super chats, KB Rugger 90, said that you did not address the super chats about the MiGs, and I think actually that was the exact moment when the stream cut out. So unfortunately, we addressed it sort of during that time. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if you want to touch on them again potentially or not. I don't think they were able to hear it because of the difficulties.
Got you. Was that the one that talked about sending over early version F-16s and F-35s as well?
So yes, it was that, and it was also they want to send over more planes to Ukraine and send them very quickly.
All right, so I'm sorry that you didn't hear that. Apparently, the internet outage affected that, but we did address it. We didn't miss it. But I'll cover it again just because you didn't hear it, and you know that's the whole point. She asked it was to hear it. So I agree that sending over MiGs is a vital thing. Of course, they would have to be driven over or something that can't be flown in because the Russians have made it very clear that that'll lead to war. But as far as the early F-16s, no Ukrainian pilots, as far as I know, have been trained on any kind of Western aircraft or systems, so those would be foreign to them, and that would require training, which takes time, and they may not have that kind of time. So the earliest F-16s, I'm not really like on board with, because I think that logistically training the Ukrainian pilots on them may be a little difficult. And then finally, the F-35, I wouldn't send that thing over because it's a war zone. And that thing, considering that'll probably be put in the hands of a green pilot that's never really flown the F-35 much, could probably be shot down. And if it's shot down over Russian-controlled territory, the Russians could get a hold of a whole bunch of brand new equipment that they've never seen before and might be able to start looking at it and reverse engineering it, and maybe starting to make it easier to produce more up-to-date aircraft for their military that they weren't able to do before. So I do think that the MiGs are an incredibly good idea. I think we need to figure out how to get those over there as fast as possible. But as far as the F-16s and the F-35, you know, I mean, like, in my opinion, I don't think that's a good idea. But, you know, it could work. Who knows? But I do thank you for the support. And I hope that does answer the question. I'm sorry that you didn't hear it earlier, but we did address it. So just know that we didn't skip over you and, like, try and give you the bad treatment or the silent treatment or anything. So I thank you so much for the support. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Greg McGonigal, who says, "Hi, Enforcer. Have you heard anything about the train heading west that was seen outside of Ivanovo, Russia, loaded with ICBM launchers?"
I have not, and I haven't actually seen any videos of it. That appears that if it's heading west, of course, that could be anywhere, but it looks like there's two rail lines heading out of Ivanovo towards the west. One of them looks like it starts heading up into the direction of Tver, and the other one looks like it's going towards Moscow. So that may just be one of the roving ICBM batteries that the Russians have. Of course, there's these Russian large trucks. They're specially made as mobile ICBM silos. and those move around the country often, and you could film those here and there, and if they're moving west, you of course could be saying, they're moving west to set up to nuke Ukraine, but that's not entirely true. Usually those things are made mobile, so that way their location isn't always known, and a nuke can't just smack it and take that one out. So I thank you very much for the support. That's kind of my opinion on it. I don't really think there's much to be taken from it. I think it's just happening to be heading west right now, but I do thank you for the question. It was a good one. And so with that, we're going to move on to our last question of the night. And so who was the lucky person who got in the last question?
So this person is Duncan VR, who is a longtime channel regular. He says, "Did you know Russian airmen POWs held by Ukraine had in their possession maps showing civilian targets to bomb? Real evidence of war crimes."
I think that may be a thing that they had targeted. I think that it's not their... can't really say that because they executed loads of civilians and went out of their way to do it in the Bucha Hostomel European area. They may actually have had a goal of executing civilians, but I believe at the outset of the war, like the very opening of it, when they started killing civilians, the whole goal of that was really just being lazy, and they were trying to hit military units, and they didn't really care about hitting civilian units. So I think that was kind of what you could find out of that war, out of the beginning. But I think later on it actually became their goal to target Ukrainian civilians because we saw them go out of their way to do it. So I think that may be evidence of war crimes, and I think if there's any maps to show that they are targeting civilian buildings specifically, that does further prove that claim. And so with that, I hope I answered that question, and we've reached the end of tonight's stream. Unfortunately, a lot of people got disconnected earlier, but I hope I did answer everyone's questions and everyone got to stay around and hear them answered. And so I thank y'all all so much once again for coming tonight. We will be streaming tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern time and every single day except for Monday. So if you're new to this, stream and you managed to get through the outage, I hope you like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope you stay around. We also have a Discord in the description below, and so I thank y'all all so much. Hope y'all stick around, and I hope to everyone who has been sticking around, I hope y'all enjoyed tonight's stream once again. And so with that, I hope you'll have a great night. Take care.